Welcome to the National Occult Archives from the British Museum. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Tonight, I present 45 chilling cases from across the United Kingdom, spanning the 12th through 19th centuries. These extraordinary testimonies from priests, constables, physicians, sailors, and ordinary citizens who encountered the unexplainable, from haunted forests and isolated monasteries to cursed manor houses and phantom ships. These accounts reveal a Britain where the supernatural was never far from everyday life. So turn down the world, open the darkness, and let the forgotten be heard. Case file NOA1587K. Classification: Constable's Incident Report. Date of statement: 9th February 1587. Location: Ashdown Forest, Sussex. Report of Constable Thomas Wren. Thomas Wren, Constable of Hartfield Parish. Do record the matter of the forest apparition witnessed during patrol. My duties required me to traverse Ashdown Forest after dark on the 6th instant. The moon provided sufficient light for safe passage along the familiar tracks. Near Old Lodge, I observed a figure standing among the trees ahead. I called out, announcing my office and requesting identification. The figure remained motionless. I approached with caution, my lantern raised. As I drew within 20 paces, I perceived the figure to be that of a woman in ragged garments. Her face was turned towards me, though I could discern no features in the darkness. I called again, asking if she required assistance. She raised one arm and pointed deeper into the forest. Her hand appeared unnaturally pale, almost luminous in the moonlight. I took 3 steps closer. The woman began to walk backwards into the trees, her arms still extended. Her movement was peculiar, gliding rather than stepping. I followed, concerned she might be injured or lost. The trees grew denser. My lantern cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently. The woman stopped beside a massive oak. I was now close enough to see her clearly. Her dress was of ancient fashion, rotted and torn. Her feet made no sound upon the fallen leaves. Most disturbing was her face, which appeared as white as bone. Her eyes were dark hollows that reflected my lantern light. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She pointed downward at the base of the oak. I looked to where she indicated. When I raised my eyes again, she had vanished. I searched the immediate area thoroughly. There were no footprints in the soft earth, save my own. I examined the oak's base and found the ground disturbed. Beneath a thin layer of soil, I discovered human bones. The remains appeared old, possibly decades or centuries. I marked the location and returned to Hartfield immediately. The following day, I returned with the parish priest and 2 men. We recovered a complete skeleton, that of a woman. Scraps of ancient fabric clung to the bones. Father Edmund identified the cloth as being of a style from 200 years past. No record exists of anyone buried in that location. The remains were interred in consecrated ground with proper rites. I have patrolled that route many times since. On 3 occasions, I have seen the pale woman standing among the trees. Each time she appears in the same location where I first observed her. She no longer points or beckons. She simply stands and watches. I no longer approach when I see her. Thomas Wren, Constable Hartfield, Sussex, 9th February 1587. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, cross-referenced with Sussex parish records. A woman named Margaret Ashby disappeared in 1387, never found. The constable's description of fabric matches the period exactly. His sketch of the location corresponds to current Old Lodge area. End of file. Case file NOA 164 2M. Classification Priest testimony. Date of statement 23rd October 1642. Location St. Bartholomew's Church, Durham. Testimony of Father Benedict Marsh I. Father Benedict Marsh, do testify regarding the disturbances within St. Bartholomew's Church during the month past. The troubles began on the feast of St. Michael. I was preparing the altar for evening prayers when I heard footsteps in the nave. I called out, believing a parishioner had entered. No response came. The footsteps continued, steady and deliberate, pacing from the entrance to the chancel. I walked into the nave. It was empty. The footsteps ceased the moment I appeared. I resumed my duties at the altar. Within moments, the footsteps began again, now in the south aisle. I remained still and listened carefully. The sound was unmistakable, heavy boots upon stone. They walked the length of the aisle, paused, then returned. This pattern repeated 7 times before falling silent. The following evening, the same occurred. I brought Brother Oswin to witness. We stood together in the nave as darkness fell. The footsteps commenced precisely at the 7th hour. Brother Oswin went pale and clutched his rosary. The steps circled us, moving from aisle to aisle. We saw nothing, though the sound was as clear as if someone walked beside us. Brother Oswin attempted to speak a prayer of protection. His voice caught in his throat. A terrible coldness descended upon the church. Our breath became visible in the air. The footsteps stopped directly before the altar. We heard a voice, low and speaking words I did not recognize. The language was neither English nor Latin. Brother Oswin whispered that it sounded like ancient Welsh. The voice grew louder, more insistent. It spoke in rhythmic patterns, like an incantation. The candles upon the altar flickered and dimmed. Then the voice changed. It began to recite the Pater Noster in Latin, but backwards. Malo a nos libera sed. Each phrase was inverted, a mockery of sacred prayer. Brother Oswin fell to his knees. I commanded the presence to depart in the name of Christ. The voice ceased abruptly. The candles extinguished simultaneously. We remained in absolute darkness for several minutes. When I managed to relight a taper, we found the altar cloth had been pulled to the floor. The communion vessels were overturned. We blessed the church with holy water and incense. The footsteps have not returned. However, each evening at the 7th hour, the temperature in the church drops dramatically. The candles dim without explanation. And sometimes, very faintly, I hear whispered Latin from the empty air. Father Benedict Marsh, St. Bartholomew's Church, Durham, 23rd October, 1642. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Church records indicate a Welsh monk died within St. Bartholomew's in 1342, circumstances unclear. The reversed Latin prayers suggest deliberate spiritual opposition. Temperature fluctuations continue to be reported by current clergy, though the building has modern heating. End of file. Case file NOA 1593P. Classification Hospital Matron's Record. Date of statement 14th May 1593. Location St. Thomas's Infirmary, Canterbury. Record of Matron Elizabeth Howe, C. Elizabeth Howe, Matron of St. Thomas's Infirmary. Do record the strange events concerning bed 17 in the Eastern Ward. The bed in question has stood empty for 3 weeks. No patient will consent to occupy it. The trouble began when goodwife Sarah Miller was placed there in late April. She complained immediately of cold, though the ward was warm. She claimed unseen hands touched her face during the night. I dismissed this as fever delirium. The following morning, she was found cowering in the corner, refusing to return to the bed. She spoke of a dark figure that stood over her while she slept. We moved her to another bed, where she recovered normally. The next patient assigned to bed 17 was a merchant named John Price. He lasted one night only. At dawn, he was discovered sitting rigid, staring at the wall. He would not speak for several hours. When his voice returned, he described a woman in grey who sat upon his chest. He said she whispered things in a language he could not understand. Her breath was cold upon his face. Her weight pressed him into the mattress until he could scarcely breathe. He begged to be moved and departed the infirmary that same day. I began to take notice of the pattern. I inspected the bed thoroughly, finding nothing unusual. I myself spent a night beside it, keeping vigil. At approximately 3 hours past midnight, I experienced the phenomenon. The temperature around the bed decreased notably. I saw my breath mist before me. A shadow appeared at the foot of the bed, though no light source could account for it. The shadow was shaped like a woman, hunched and twisted. It moved slowly along the side of the bed toward where a patient's head would rest. I spoke a prayer aloud. The shadow paused, but did not retreat. I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness emanating from it. Then came anger, sudden and intense. The bedclothes were violently pulled away, though I saw no hand touch them. The shadow lunged toward me. I felt pressure upon my chest, crushing and terrible. Cold fingers seemed to probe my face. I could not breathe, could not cry out. I clutched my cross and silently recited the Lord's Prayer. After what seemed an eternity, the pressure released. The shadow withdrew to the corner and faded. I have since learned that a woman named Catherine died in that bed 4 years past. She succumbed to a wasting illness that left her in great suffering. Her final hours were spent alone, as her family had abandoned her. The bed remains empty. I have placed a cross upon the wall above it. Patients in nearby beds report hearing weeping from that corner of the ward. Some nights, the bedclothes are found disturbed in the morning, as if someone had slept there. Elizabeth Howe, Matron St. Thomas's Infirmary, Canterbury, 14th May, 1593. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Infirmary records confirm Catherine Downs died in the Eastern Ward, April 1589. Medical notes describe great anguish in her final days. The bed was removed in 1610, but staff continued reporting unexplained phenomena in that ward section. End of file. Case file NOA1678R. Classification: Schoolmaster's account. Date of statement: 3rd December 1678. Location: Grammar School, Kendal, Westmoreland. Account of Schoolmaster William Blackwood First, Sis Sir. William Blackwood, Schoolmaster. Do account the disturbances plaguing the upper classroom since Michaelmas. The room in question occupies the second floor of our schoolhouse. It has served as a classroom for 30 years without incident. The changes began shortly after we resumed lessons in September. Several boys complained of hearing whispers during quiet study. I attributed this to mischief and administered appropriate discipline. The whispers continued despite my vigilance. I began to hear them myself. The sound appeared to emanate from the northeast corner of the room. It was too faint to discern words, but the rhythm suggested conversation. Multiple voices seemed to speak at once. I investigated the corner thoroughly. The plaster was sound, with no gaps or openings. The floor showed no signs of disturbance, yet the whispers persisted. Young Edmund Gray claimed he could understand some of the words. He said they spoke of lessons and recitations. He described hearing children's voices reciting Latin declensions. I dismissed this as imagination until I heard it clearly myself. During an afternoon lesson, while my students worked in silence, I distinctly heard childish voices chanting, "Amo amas amat." The conjugation continued through all persons and tenses. None of my students were speaking. All sat with heads bent over their work. The chanting came from empty air. It continued for perhaps 2 minutes, then ceased abruptly. The following week brought worse. I arrived early one morning to prepare lessons. The classroom was in complete disarray. Desks had been moved from their positions. Slates lay scattered across the floor. Books were pulled from the shelves and stacked in peculiar towers. The chalk had been used to write upon every surface. The writing was childish, poorly formed letters spelling out names. Robert, William, Thomas, John, Edward, Richard, Henry. 7 names repeated over and over on walls, floor, and desks. I cleaned the mess and questioned my students. All denied any involvement. I began to arrive earlier each day. On the 3rd morning, I witnessed the phenomenon myself. I sat quietly in the empty classroom before dawn. As the first light entered through the windows, I saw them. Faint, translucent shapes of children sitting at desks that were no longer there. 7 boys, dressed in clothing from perhaps 50 years past. They appeared to be taking a lesson. Their mouths moved silently. One held up a slate as if showing his work to an invisible teacher. Another appeared to be writing with a quill that left no mark. They were utterly unaware of my presence. I watched for several minutes, transfixed. Then the school bell rang for morning assembly. The shapes vanished instantly. I discovered later that a fever had claimed 7 students in the year 1628. All were boys from the upper classroom. They died within a week of each other. The names on the wall matched the death records exactly. The whispers continued daily. My current students have grown accustomed to the sound. Some claim to see the gai. The ghostly boys during lessons. I no longer attempt to prevent or explain the phenomena. The dead students seem content to continue their eternal lessons. William Blackwood, Schoolmaster Grammar School, Kendall 3rd, December 1678. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Parish Records document the 1628 fever outbreak that killed 7 students. The classroom layout was different then, which may explain the phantom desks. Current school occupants report similar phenomena, particularly during examination periods. Some students claim the ghosts help them study. End of file. Case file NOA1715T. Classification: Lighthouse Keeper's Log. Date of statement: 19th March 1715. Location: Longstone Lighthouse, Farne Islands, Northumberland. Log entry of Keeper Nathaniel Ward Worse, Nathaniel Ward, Keeper of Longstone Light. Do record the events of this past week for official record. I have maintained this lighthouse for 12 years without incident of supernatural nature. What I report now will sound unbelievable, yet I swear to its truth. The storms this March have been fierce and continuous. On the Shalm, night of the 13th, the wind reached such intensity that I feared for the tower's stability. I remained in the light room, tending the lamps and watching the sea. Near midnight, I observed a ship in distress upon the rocks. The vessel was breaking apart in the violent waves. I could see figures clinging to the rigging. I lit additional warning fires and prepared to render assistance at first light. The storm made any immediate rescue impossible. I watched helplessly as the ship was consumed by the sea. By dawn, nothing remained but scattered debris. That evening, I heard knocking upon the lighthouse door. I descended quickly, expecting perhaps a survivor had reached the island. I opened the door to emptiness. The knocking resumed, now from inside the tower. I climbed back to the light room. The knocking followed me, moving up the spiral stairs just behind my steps. When I reached the top, it stopped. I resumed my duties, attributing the sounds to wind or storm damage. At precisely midnight, I heard voices. Men's voices, calling out in distress. They seemed to come from the gallery outside the light room. I opened the door and looked out. The gallery was empty, but the voices continued. They cried for help in desperate tones. They called to God and to loved ones. They screamed as if drowning. I recognized the sounds of men dying at sea. The voices surrounded me, coming from every direction. I retreated inside and bolted the door. The voices did not cease. They continued until the first light of dawn. This has repeated every night since. As midnight approaches, I hear the knocking. It climbs the stairs slowly, deliberately. When the clock strikes 12, the voices begin. The drowned men cry out for hours. I hear them calling names, praying, begging for salvation. Sometimes I hear them speaking to each other, trying to maintain courage as the water takes them. Last night, I heard them singing a hymn together. Their voices faded one by one until only silence remained. I have examined the tower thoroughly in daylight. There is no damage, no explanation for the sounds. I have checked the times of the cries against the ship's destruction. They match exactly the hours when the vessel was breaking apart. I believe the dying men's final moments have become trapped here. The lighthouse that could not save them now holds their last sounds. Each night, their deaths repeat. I continue my duties, but I dread the coming of darkness. Nathaniel Ward, Lighthouse Keeper, Longstone Lighthouse, Farne Islands, 19th March, 1715. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Lloyd's Register documents the loss of the merchant vessel Mary Catherine on March 13, 1715, with all hands. Subsequent lighthouse keepers reported similar phenomena until the light was automated in 1826. Modern equipment sometimes picks up unexplained voice recordings during storms. End of file. Case file NOA 1654W. Classification. Physician's notes. Date of statement 7th August 1654. Location: private residence, Bath, Somerset Medical. Notes of Dr. Ambrose Hartley. Dr. Ambrose Hartley. Do record my observations concerning the illness affecting Master Geoffrey Ashton and his household. I was summoned to the Ashton residence on the 2nd instant. Master Ashton complained of disturbed sleep and waking exhaustion. His wife reported similar symptoms. Both described vivid nightmares of being unable to move or breathe. Physical examination revealed no obvious ailment. I prescribed a mild sedative and returned the following day. The symptoms had worsened considerably. Master Ashton appeared haggard, with dark circles beneath his eyes. He claimed something entered his chamber each night. He described a presence that pressed upon his chest. He felt paralyzed, unable to cry out or move. He saw a figure looming over him, dark and shapeless. His wife confirmed experiencing identical phenomena. Their children, sleeping in separate chambers, reported the same. I began to suspect a shared delusion or poisoning. I examined their food, water, and living quarters. Nothing suggested contamination. I agreed to spend a night in their home to observe. I was given a guest chamber on the upper floor. I retired late, having sat with the family until midnight. I fell asleep quickly, despite my intention to remain vigilant. I woke in absolute darkness. I could not move. My entire body felt frozen, as if bound by invisible restraints. I tried to call out, but my voice would not come. A weight settled upon my chest, heavy and suffocating. I struggled to breathe. The darkness in the room seemed to deepen and take form. I saw a shape rising from the corner, tall and impossibly thin. It moved toward my bed with a gliding motion. As it drew near, I perceived a face of sorts, features that were almost human, but stretched and wrong, eyes that reflected no light, a mouth that opened far too wide. It leaned over me, its face descending toward mine. I felt cold breath upon my skin. The pressure on my chest increased until I thought my ribs would crack. I prayed silently, unable to speak the words aloud. The thing paused, tilted its head as if listening. Then it released me and withdrew into the shadows. Movement returned to my limbs gradually. I lit every candle in the room and did not sleep again that night. At breakfast, the entire family looked at me knowingly. They had all experienced similar attacks during the night. I inquired about the house's history. The property was built upon the site of a much older dwelling. That previous house had burned, taking the lives of everyone within. Local legend held that one occupant had practiced dark arts. He had reportedly made bargains with entities best left unnamed. His death in the fire did not end his workings. I recommended the family vacate immediately. They did so within the week. The house stands empty now. Those who pass it at night report seeing a dark figure in the upper windows. It watches the street below, waiting. Dr. Ambrose Hartley Bath, Somerset 7th, August 1654. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Property records confirm a fire in 1621 killed all inhabitants. Subsequent occupants rarely remained beyond a few months. The building was demolished in 1782, but the land remains undeveloped. Bath residents still avoid walking past the site after dark. End of file. Case file NOA 1729B. Classification: Innkeeper's Statement. Date of statement: 21st November 1729. Location: the King's Head Inn, York. Statement of Innkeeper Robert Fenwick I. Robert Fenwick, keeper of the King's Head Inn, do make statement concerning room 7 on the upper floor. The room has brought nothing but trouble since I purchased this establishment. Guests who spend a night in room 7 invariably depart before dawn. Many refuse to pay, claiming the accommodation was uninhabitable. The complaints follow a consistent pattern. All describe being woken by a woman weeping. The sound comes from within the room itself. Some report seeing her sitting in the chair by the window. She is described as young, dressed in a white gown with long dark hair. Her face remains hidden as she weeps into her hands. Those who attempt to speak to her receive no response. She continues crying, oblivious to their presence. As the night progresses, her weeping grows more distressed. It builds to sobbing and wailing that echoes through the walls. Then, suddenly, she falls silent. Guests report an overwhelming sense of dread at this moment. The woman slowly raises her head. Her face is revealed, pale and drawn with anguish. Her eyes are fixed upon the ceiling beam. She stands and walks directly beneath it. Those who witness this far all describe the same terrible conclusion. She reaches upward as if grasping something invisible. Her body becomes rigid. Her feet lift from the floor, though nothing visible supports her. She hangs suspended in the air, swaying slightly. Her face turns purple, her eyes bulge. The sounds of choking fill the room. After several minutes, her body falls to the floor and vanishes. I myself have witnessed this apparition twice. I can attest to every detail described by my guests. The vision is so real, so visceral, that it leaves one shaken for days. I have researched the room's history. In the year 1691, a young woman did indeed take her own life in that room. Her name was Mary Fletcher. She had been with child, abandoned by the father. Unable to bear the shame, she ended her suffering. The innkeeper at that time cut her down from the beam. That same beam remains in the room today. I have considered removing it, but fear such action might worsen the haunting. The room is gigaring, no longer let to guests. I keep it locked and use it only for storage. Yet the weeping is still heard by those in adjacent rooms. And sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps pacing above, back and forth, as if she still walks that room, waiting for a peace that will never come. Robert Fenwick, innkeeper, the King's Head Inn, York, 21st November, 1729. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft parish burial records show Mary Fletcher, age 19, interred in unconsecrated ground in November 1691. The original beam was removed during renovations in 1823, but phenomena persisted. The inn closed in 1956. The building now houses offices where employees report ongoing disturbances. End of file. Case file NOA 1576D. Classification: Monk's Journal entry. Date of statement: 16th April 1576. Location: Revo Abbey, Yorkshire. Journal of Brother Thomas Colfer. Brother Thomas Cole, do record events within the ruins of our once great abbey. Rivaux was dissolved these 40 years past. Only 3 of us remain, permitted to live out our days in the old dormitory. The church and cloisters stand open to the elements. Brother Edmund, Brother John, and myself maintain what prayers we can. We tend the graves of our deceased brothers in the chapter house cemetery. Last week, Brother Edmund claimed to have seen monks walking the night office. He said they processed through the ruined nave as if the roof still stood. He counted 20 figures in black habits, carrying candles. They sang the psalms for matins, though no sound reached his ears. Brother John and I thought his mind wandered. He is past 80 years and sometimes speaks of things long gone. Then I saw them myself. I had risen to use the privy in the darkest hours. Crossing the cloister garth, I observed lights moving in the church. I approached, thinking vagrants had lit a fire within. I saw instead a sight that stopped my heart. The church was whole again. The roof stood complete, the windows intact with coloured glass, every pillar and arch restored to former glory. And the monks were there, dozens of them, arranged in the choir stalls. They sang the divine office in perfect harmony. Their voices filled the sacred space with ethereal beauty. I recognized faces, brothers who died decades before I took vows. There was Brother Anselm, who taught me Latin, Brother Martin, who died of plague in my novice year, Brother Richard, our last abbot before dissolution. They appeared as real as any living man. I could see their breath in the cold air, I could see pages turning in their service books. I stepped through the church doorway. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything changed. The roof vanished. The walls crumbled back to their ruined state. The monks disappeared like smoke. The singing ceased. I stood alone among fallen stones beneath the stars. I have witnessed this phenomenon 3 times since, always in the deepest part of night, always the same vision of the church restored, always the monks singing their eternal office. Brother John has now seen it as well. He weeps each time, mourning what we lost. Brother Edmund says they have never left. He claims the dissolution scattered our bodies, but not our souls. He believes we will all eventually join that ghostly choir. We will sing praises forever in a church that exists beyond mortal sight. I do not know if this brings comfort or horror. I know only that the dead monks continue their sacred duties. They mark the hours with prayer and song. They maintain the rhythms of monastic life within walls that no longer stand. Perhaps there are things that cannot be dissolved by earthly authority. Perhaps some devotions persist beyond death itself. Brother Thomas Cole Revol, Abbey, Yorkshire, 16th April, 1576. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Revol. Abbey was dissolved in 1538. The 3 elderly monks mentioned received royal permission to remain until death. Brother Thomas died in 1578. Modern visitors frequently report hearing chanting and seeing lights in the ruins, particularly during hours that correspond to traditional monastic offices. End of file. Case file NOA1683L. Classification: Magistrate's Report. Date of statement: 5th January 1683. Location: Pendle Hill, Lancashire. Report of Magistrate Edward Starling Ware. Edward Starling. Magistrate: do report my investigation into claims of witchcraft near Pendle Hill. A farmer named William Dewhurst petitioned me regarding events at his property. He claimed his livestock were being cursed, his crops failing, his children falling ill. He accused his neighbour, widow Agnes Nutter, of bewitching his family. I am sceptical of such claims, but duty required investigation. I visited the Dewhurst farm accompanied by 2 constables. William showed me his field, where no crops would grow. The soil appeared normal, yet nothing thrived in a large circular patch. His cattle were thin and sickly, despite adequate feed. His eldest daughter lay abed with a fever that would not break. She muttered constantly in her sleep, words without meaning. I questioned William about his quarrel with widow Nutter. He admitted to a property dispute over a shared boundary. I suspected the accusations stemmed from this, rather than genuine witchcraft. I nevertheless interviewed Agnes Nutter at her cottage. She was a woman of perhaps 60 years, living alone. Her home was poor but clean, nothing suggesting occult practice. She denied all accusations with quiet dignity. As I prepared to depart, she offered me a warning. She said there were indeed dark forces on Pendle Hill, but they were far older than any living witch. She claimed the hill itself was cursed from ancient times. She spoke of rituals performed there centuries past by people whose names were forgotten. She said those who climbed to the summit at certain times would encounter things that should not be. I dismissed this as the ramblings of an eccentric old woman. My opinion changed the following week. My constable, Thomas Briggs, went missing while patrolling near Pendle Hill. We found him 3 days later, sitting at the hill's summit. He was alive but would not speak. His eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. We brought him down forcibly. He remained in this state for 2 days. When speech returned, he could not explain where he had been. He remembered climbing the hill to investigate unusual lights. Then nothing until we found him. But he bore marks upon his arms. Strange symbols burned into his flesh. The burns were precise, deliberate, forming patterns unknown to us. No flame had touched him that we could determine. I returned to question Agnes Nutter. She examined the marks and went pale. She said they were signs of the old ones, the beings that dwelt here before Christ came to Britain. She claimed Pendle Hill was one of their sacred places. She warned me to investigate no further. I should have heeded her. That night, I dreamed of the hill. I saw figures dancing in circles beneath a moonless sky. They wore no clothing, and their bodies were painted with symbols. They chanted in a language that hurt my ears. Something vast and terrible watched from beyond my sight. I woke with those same symbols burned into my own arms. I have sealed my report and recommended no further investigation. William Dewhurst's accusations against Agnes Nutter are dismissed. Whatever haunts Pendle Hill is not the work of any living witch. Edward Starling, Magistrate, Lancashire, 5th January 1683. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Pendle Hill's association with the supernatural predates the famous witch trials of 1612. Archaeological surveys have found evidence of Iron Age ritual sites on the summit. The specific symbols described by Starling match Celtic religious markings. Multiple investigators over the centuries have reported similar experiences. End of file. Case file NOA 1741F. Classification: Prison Warden's Log. Date of statement: 12th July 1741. Location: Bodmin Gaol, Cornwall. Log entry of Warden Charles Pascoe. First, Charles Pascoe, Warden of Bodmin Gaol, do record unusual events concerning cell 14 in the lower tier. The cell has housed many prisoners over the years without incident. This changed following the execution of convicted murderer James Trelawney. Trelawney was hanged on the 28th of June for the killing of 2 men. He maintained his innocence to the end, cursing those who condemned him. His final words from the scaffold were a promise to return. 3 days after his burial, strange occurrences began in cell 14. This was the cell where Trelawney spent his final month. The first report came from my night guard, Samuel Trewin. He heard screaming from the cell during his rounds. When he investigated, he found the cell empty and locked. The screaming continued, emanating from within. He described it as the voice of a man in terror and agony. The sound lasted for several minutes before falling silent. The following night brought similar screams at the same hour. I ordered the cell to remain empty until the matter could be resolved. But the disturbances escalated. We began to hear footsteps pacing within the locked cell, the sound of chains dragging across stone, muttered prayers and curses. I spent a night in the corridor outside cell 14. At precisely 3 hours past midnight, the phenomena began. I heard movement within the cell. I peered through the small window in the door. A figure stood in the corner, back turned to me. It wore prisoner's clothing. I recognized the distinctive tear in the shirt worn by Trelawney. I called out, demanding identification. The figure slowly turned. It was Trelawney's face, but changed. His neck bore the marks of the rope, bruised and distorted. His eyes bulged from his face. His tongue protruded, swollen and black. He raised one hand and pointed at me. His mouth moved, but the voice came from everywhere. "Innocent," he rasped. "Murdered by false witness. No peace until truth is known." He advanced toward the door. I stepped back involuntarily. He pressed his face against the small window. I could see every horrible detail of his death etched upon his features. Then he spoke names: Thomas Penrose, William Nancarrow, the two witnesses whose testimony had convicted him. He claimed they had lied to conceal their own guilt. He swore they had committed the murders and blamed him. The apparition faded slowly, his final words echoing in the corridor. I investigated his claims discreetly. I discovered that Penrose and Nancarrow had indeed profited greatly after Trelawney's arrest. They had divided his property between them. There were whispers in the town that they had long coveted his land. I reported my findings to the magistrate. No action was taken, as Trelawney was already executed. But 3 months later, both Penrose and Nancarrow died in unusual circumstances. Penrose was found hanged in his barn. Nancarrow fell from his horse and broke his neck. The screaming from cell 14 ceased after their deaths, but the cell remains disturbed. Prisoners placed there report feeling watched. They see a shadow in the corner that moves when not directly observed. They hear whispered accusations in the night. We no longer use cell 14 for housing prisoners. Charles Pascoe, Warden Bodmin Gaol, Cornwall, 12th July, 1741. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft court records of Trelawney's trial show questionable evidence and suspiciously eager witnesses. Modern forensic review suggests potential miscarriage of justice. Bodmin Gaol, now a museum, receives numerous reports of paranormal activity, with cell 14 being the most active location. Visitors frequently capture unexplained photographic anomalies there. End of file. Case file NOA 1619N. Classification: Vicar's personal account. Date of statement: 9th September 1619. Location: St. Mary's Church, Ely, Cambridgeshire. Personal account of Reverend Jonathan Hale III. Reverend Jonathan Hale, Vicar of St. Mary's. Do record events that challenge my understanding of the spiritual realm. I have served this parish for 15 years with steadfast faith. What I describe now has shaken that faith to its foundation. The troubles began after we opened the crypt for repairs. The crypt had been sealed for over 100 years. Dampness had damaged the foundations and restoration was required. When the masons broke the seal, a foul odor emerged. Not the musty smell of age, but something rotten and wrong. We proceeded with the work despite this. Among the old coffins, we found one that bore no marking. It was plain wood, crudely made, and appeared older than the others. The workers were curious and pried it open. Inside lay remains in a remarkable state of preservation. The body was that of a man, dressed in ecclesiastical robes. His face was peaceful, almost as if sleeping. But something about him disturbed us all. His hands were positioned strangely, fingers twisted in an unnatural pattern. Around his neck hung an amulet we did not recognize. The symbol upon it was not Christian. I ordered the coffin resealed and the crib work completed quickly. That night, I dreamed of the corpse. In my dream, its eyes opened. It sat upright and turned its head toward me. Its mouth moved, speaking words in a language I had never heard. The words caused physical pain, like needles in my skull. I woke, gasping, my head throbbing. The following day, strange things began occurring in the church. Candles would not stay lit near the altar. The communion wine turned foul in its vessel. The church Bible was found open to Revelation each morning, regardless of where I left it. I attempted to pray for guidance. When I knelt before the altar, I heard laughter. It came from beneath my feet, from the crypt below. I descended to investigate. The unmarked coffin had been disturbed. The lid lay partially open, though no one had entered. I approached cautiously and looked within. The body had changed position. It now lay on its side, facing outward. The eyes were open. They were black, entirely black, with no white visible. They stared directly at me. I fled the crypt and sealed the door with holy water and prayer. I researched the church records desperately. I found reference to a priest who served here in the year 1470. He was removed from his position for heretical practices. He reportedly dabbled in forbidden knowledge, seeking power through old pagan rites. He died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. The church buried him without ceremony in the crypt. They sealed his coffin with protective symbols. Those symbols were broken when we opened the crypt. Now I hear him moving in the darkness below. I hear his footsteps on the crypt stairs. I hear him whispering his terrible prayers. Each night he draws closer to breaking through into the church. I have requested assistance from the bishop. I have blessed every surface with holy water. I have prayed until my voice fails. Nothing stops his approach. Last night I saw him standing at the crypt door. His black eyes gleamed in the darkness. His mouth smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only hunger. Reverend Jonathan Hale, St. Mary's Church, Ely, 9th September 1619. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft Church. Records confirm a Father Edmund Blackwell was defrocked in 1470 for trafficking with demons. The crypt was resealed by the bishop's order in 1620 and has never been reopened. St. Mary's was deconsecrated in 1647. Following reports, it was unhallowed ground. The building still stands, unused and avoided. End of file. Case file. NOA 1757Q. Classification. Merchant's testimony. Date of statement. 26 February 1757. Location. Chester, Cheshire. Testimony of merchant Daniel Crossley. Daniel Crossley, merchant of Chester. Do testify regarding my experience on the road between Chester and Wrexham. I make this journey frequently for business, always without incident. Last month, circumstances required me to travel after dark. I departed Chester as the sun was setting. My horse was fresh and the weather clear. I expected to reach Wrexham by midnight. The road was familiar and I rode with confidence. About halfway to my destination, I noticed the temperature dropping sharply. My breath became visible, though the evening had been mild. My horse began to show nervousness, ears back, and steps hesitant. I urged him forward, but he resisted. Then I saw what had disturbed him. Ahead on the road stood a figure. At first, I took it for another traveller. As I drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The figure wore clothing from another era, a long cloak and hood that appeared medieval in style. It stood perfectly still in the center of the road. I called out a greeting. No response came. I pulled my horse to a stop about 20 feet distant. The figure remained motionless. I could not see a face within the hood, only darkness, deep and complete. I felt a strong urge to turn back, but my business in Wrexham was urgent. I decided to ride around the obstacle. I guided my horse to the left, giving the figure a wide berth. As I drew level with it, the figure's head turned to follow me. I still could not see any features. The movement was smooth, too smooth for a living person. My horse screamed and reared. I fought to maintain control. When I looked again, the figure had moved. It now stood directly in front of me, having crossed the distance instantly. I saw into the hood. There was no face, only an abyss that seemed to extend forever. Looking into it brought overwhelming terror. My heart raced, my hands trembled. I felt as if I was falling into that darkness. The figure raised one arm and pointed back toward Chester. The gesture was clear, a command to turn back. I needed no further encouragement. I wheeled my horse around and fled. I rode hard until I could see the lights of Chester. Only then did I slow and look back. The road behind me was empty. I completed my journey to Wrexham the next day in full sunlight. I inquired discreetly about the road's reputation. The innkeeper grew pale when I described my encounter. He told me of the Black Monk of Chester Road. The apparition has been seen for over 200 years. It appears to travellers after dark, always in the same location. Those who heed its warning and turn back suffer no harm, but several who attempted to pass it have met with accidents. One man was found dead on the road, his face frozen in an expression of terror. His horse was never found. Another disappeared entirely, neither he nor his mount ever seen again. I asked what the figure wanted, why it haunted that stretch of road. The innkeeper said no one knows. Perhaps it guards something. Perhaps it warns of danger ahead. Or perhaps it simply enjoys spreading fear. I now take a different route to Wrexham, though it adds hours to my journey. I will not risk another encounter with that faceless sentinel. Daniel Crossley, Merchant Chester, Cheshire, 26 February 1757. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Local folklore confirms the Black Monk legend dating to the early 1500s. Several deaths on that road section remain unexplained. Modern drivers report sudden equipment failure and overwhelming dread at the same location. Traffic accidents occur with unusual frequency there, despite good road conditions. End of file. Case file NOA 1645V. Classification: Asylum Attendance Report. Date of statement: 15th May 1645. Location: Bethlehem Hospital, London. Report of Attendant Marcus Finch there. S. Marcus Finch, attendant at Bethlehem Hospital. Do report the disturbing case of patient Eleanor Webb. Mistress Webb was committed 3 weeks past, suffering from melancholia. She had become withdrawn, refusing to eat or speak. Her family believed she was possessed by evil spirits. Initial examination revealed no obvious physical ailment. She sat motionless for hours, staring at nothing. We housed her in a cell on the women's ward. For the first week, she remained in this catatonic state. Then, on the 8th night, everything changed. The night attendant heard her screaming. When we reached her cell, we found her standing in the center. Her eyes were open but unfocused. She was speaking rapidly in a voice not her own. The voice was deep, masculine, and spoke Latin fluently. Eleanor herself knew no Latin. We attempted to calm her, but she did not respond to our presence. She continued her Latin recitation for over an hour. I recognized some of the phrases as religious in nature, but they were spoken backwards, perverted. She called upon names I did not recognize, names that sounded ancient and wrong. Finally, she collapsed. When she woke, she had no memory of the episode. This pattern has repeated nightly. Each evening around the 9th hour, the transformation begins. Her body becomes rigid. Her voice changes. The Latin speeches flow endlessly. Last night, I witnessed something that terrified me beyond measure. While speaking in the strange voice, Eleanor rose from the floor. Her feet lifted from the ground. She floated there, suspended impossibly. Her arms spread wide, her head thrown back. The cell grew freezing cold. Our breath came out in clouds. Objects in the cell began to shake. Her wooden cup lifted into the air and spun. The blanket rose from the bed and writhed like a living thing. I prayed aloud, calling upon Christ for protection. The moment I spoke the holy name, Eleanor fell. She struck the floor hard and did not move. We thought she might be dead, but she breathed still, though barely. I have requested a priest to perform exorcism. The hospital physician dismisses my account as hysteria. He insists Eleanor suffers from natural illness only, but I know what I have seen. Something inhabits that woman, something that speaks through her mouth, something that defies the laws of nature. Yesterday, while she sat in her daylight stupor, I examined her closely. Her eyes were empty, as if the person inside had gone elsewhere. But when I looked away and then back, she was staring directly at me. She smiled, a terrible smile that belonged to someone else. "Nos sumus legio," she whispered. "We are legion." Then the emptiness returned to her eyes. I have asked to be reassigned to a different ward. My request was denied. I must continue attending Eleanor Webb. I must face each night whatever demon uses her as its vessel. I pray for deliverance, but fear my prayers go unheard. Marcus Finch, Attendant Bethlehem Hospital, London, 15th May, 1645. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft Hospital records show Eleanor Webb died in June 1645. Cause listed as brain fever. No priest was allowed to perform exorcism despite repeated requests. 3 other patients in adjacent cells developed similar symptoms in the weeks following her death. The ward section was closed and relocated in 16447. End of file. Case file NOA 1732H. Classification: Fisherman's account. Date of statement: 4th October 1732. Location: Whitby, Yorkshire. Account of fisherman Jacob Weatherby verse. Jacob Weatherby, fisherman of Whitby. Do account the events that befell my crew upon the sea. We set out for deep water fishing on the 1st of October. The weather was favourable, the sea calm. My boat carried myself and 3 other men. We reached our fishing grounds by mid-afternoon. The catch was good, and we worked until evening. As darkness fell, we prepared to return to port. That is, when we saw the ship. It appeared suddenly, emerging from fog that had not been there moments before. The vessel was enormous, far larger than any fishing boat. It was of ancient design, with 3 masts and square-rigged sails. But the sails hung in tatters, rotted and torn. The ship's hull was black with age and decay. It moved against the wind, gliding silently through the water. We saw no crew on deck. No lights showed in any window. The ship passed within 100 yards of us. I called out, asking if they required assistance. My voice echoed back from the vessel's hull. No other response came. Then we heard the singing. It came from within the ship, dozens of voices raised in harmony. They sang a sea shanty I recognized from my grandfather's time, a song no one has sung in 50 years. The voices were hollow, as if coming from a great distance. The ship continued past us, moving toward the shore. We watched, transfixed by the impossible sight. As it drew near the harbour entrance, it began to fade. The solid wood became translucent. We could see through the hull to the water beyond. The singing grew fainter. Within moments, the ship had vanished completely. We sat in stunned silence. Finally, my mate Thomas spoke. He said his father had told him stories of a ghost ship seen off Whitby, a merchant vessel that sank with all hands in a storm 60 years past. The ship was called the Providence. It went down attempting to reach harbour during a gale. Everyone aboard drowned within sight of safety. Thomas said the ghost ship appears before storms, a warning to other sailors. I dismissed this as superstition, but that night, a storm struck Whitby with terrible force. 2 fishing boats were lost. We survived only because we had been warned. We had secured our vessel and stayed in port. I have since learned that many Whitby fishermen have seen the Providence. Always before dangerous weather, always sailing toward the harbour it never reached. I saw it again last month. Once more, a storm followed. I now watch for it constantly. When that black ship emerges from the fog, I know to seek shelter. The dead crew of the Providence still tries to save the living, still attempts to complete their final voyage home. Jacob Weatherby, Fisherman Whitby, Yorkshire 4th, October 1732. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Maritime records confirm the Providence sank in October 1672 with loss of all crew. Whitby fishermen have logged consistent sightings preceding major storms. Modern meteorological analysis shows the sightings correlate with specific atmospheric conditions that do indeed precede severe weather. Whether supernatural or natural phenomenon remains undetermined. End of file. Case file NOA 1628S. Classification: Manor Housekeeper's Statement. Date of statement: 18th January 1628. Location: Greystone Manor, Devon. Statement of Housekeeper Margaret Winters Way. Margaret Winters, housekeeper of Greystone Manor. Do make statement regarding the mirror in the blue bedchamber. The mirror has hung in that room for 3 generations. It is a fine piece, gilt-framed and of Venetian glass. The late Lady Greystone valued it highly. She would spend hours before it, admiring her reflection. When she died last year, the family draped the mirror in black cloth as is custom. After the mourning period, the cloth was removed. The mirror has not been right since. Servants report seeing things in its reflection that are not present in the room. Shadows that move independently. Figures standing behind them when they are alone. I dismiss these reports as nerves and imagination. Then I experienced the phenomenon myself. I was cleaning the blue bedchamber one morning. I glanced at the mirror while dusting. My reflection looked back at me, but it was not alone. Behind my reflected image stood Lady Greystone. She wore the white gown she was buried in. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. She appeared exactly as she had in death. I spun around. The room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, she remained. She stood directly behind my reflection, staring at me. Her mouth opened slowly. No sound emerged, but I understood her meaning. She was trapped. The mirror held her somehow. I covered the mirror and fled the room. I reported this to Lord Greystone. He dismissed my concerns but agreed to have the mirror removed. 2 footmen were sent to take it down. They both refused after entering the room. They claimed the mirror showed them their own deaths. One saw himself as an old man on his deathbed. The other saw himself hanging from a rope. Both were white with terror. Lord Greystone went to investigate personally. He emerged shaken, but would not discuss what he saw. He ordered the room locked and the mirror left in place. The blue bedchamber has not been used since, but at night, staff passing in the corridor report seeing light under the door. We hear sounds from within. Footsteps pacing back and forth. A woman's voice speaking softly. The sound of weeping. I unlocked the room once at midnight to investigate. The mirror was uncovered, though I had left it draped. In its reflection, I saw the room as it had been years ago. The furniture was different, arranged as it was in Lady Greystone's time, and she was there, sitting at her vanity. She looked younger, healthy, alive. She was brushing her hair and smiling at her reflection. But her reflection in the mirror was the corpse. The dead woman smiled back at the living one. Neither seemed aware of the other's true state. I fled and locked the door. I have since learned that Venetian mirrors were sometimes made with mercury. Some believe mercury can trap spirits. Perhaps Lady Greystone's vanity bound her to her reflection. Perhaps she stares at her own image still, unable to look away even in death. The mirror remains in the blue bedchamber. Lord Greystone refuses to have it destroyed. He says it was his wife's favourite possession. He cannot bring himself to break it, so she remains trapped within the glass, forever gazing at her own dead face. Margaret Winters, housekeeper, Greystone Manor, Devon, 18th January 1628. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The mirror was sold at auction in 1734, following the Greystone family's financial collapse. Its current location is unknown. However, reports of a haunted Venetian mirror surface periodically at estate sales and antique dealers. Each owner reports similar phenomena before selling it quickly. End of file. Case file NOA1764M. Classification: Physician's Case Notes. Date of statement: 27th March 1764. Location: Edinburgh, Scotland. Case notes of Dr. Hugh MacLeod. Dr. Hugh MacLeod. Do record the peculiar affliction affecting the Douglas household. I was summoned to attend Mistress Catherine Douglas on the 23rd instant. Her husband reported she had fallen into a strange trance state. Upon arrival, I found her seated in the drawing room, staring at the wall. She did not respond to questions or physical stimulus. Her pulse was steady but slow. Her breathing shallow but regular. Most unusual were her eyes, which remained fixed upon a particular spot on the wall. I examined the wall and found nothing remarkable. Plain plaster, painted white, without decoration or marking. Yet she stared as if watching something of great importance. Her husband, Mr. James Douglas, explained she had been thus for 2 days. She would not eat, drink, or sleep. She sat in that exact position without moving. I attempted various treatments to rouse her from the trance. Smelling salts produced no reaction. Loud noises failed to startle her. Even pricking her hand with a pin elicited no response. As I prepared to recommend removal to an infirmary, she spoke. Her voice was flat, emotionless, that of someone speaking in sleep. "They are showing me," she said. I asked what she saw. The things that happened here, all of them, every moment. She described scenes from the house's past. A woman giving birth in terrible pain. A child dying of fever in the upstairs bedroom. A man taking his final breath in the very chair where I sat. She recounted arguments, celebrations, ordinary daily activities, but also darker things. a servant beaten by a former master, a woman weeping over a stillborn infant, a man hiding something beneath the floorboards. Mr. Douglas confirmed the house was over a century old. Many families had lived here, but Catherine could not possibly know these details. They had purchased the property only 6 months prior. I asked her who was showing her these visions. "The ones who remain," she replied. "The ones who cannot leave. They want me to see. They want me to know." I inquired as to the identity of these entities. She turned her head slowly towards me. Her eyes were different, darker somehow. "Everyone who ever suffered here, everyone who died here, they are all still present." She pointed to different areas of the room. "The child sits in that corner, crying for his mother. The old woman stands by the window, waiting for someone who will never come. The man who hid his sin walks the hallway every night, checking the boards." Mr. Douglas had gone quite pale. He admitted hearing footsteps in the hallway at night. He had attributed them to settling timbers. Catherine continued describing the invisible inhabitants. Her accounts grew more detailed and disturbing. She spoke of a fire that had damaged part of the house decades ago. She described a woman trapped in an upper room, unable to escape. She could hear the woman's screams, she said. They echoed through time, happening over and over. I suggested we leave the drawing room, but Catherine insisted we could not escape them. They are in every room. They are in the walls. They soak into the very foundation. This house remembers everything, and it shows those who can see. I asked why she could see when others could not. She said some people are more sensitive to such phenomena. She had always sensed things others missed, but never with such clarity and intensity. It was as if a door in her mind had opened, or perhaps the house itself had opened doors. I prescribed a strong sedative and recommended immediate relocation. Mr. Douglas agreed. They departed Edinburgh within the week. I visited the house after their departure. New tenants had already moved in. I spoke with them briefly. They reported nothing unusual, but I noticed the wife would not enter the drawing room. She said it made her uncomfortable, though she could not explain why. I have since learned that no family remains in that house for more than a year. All leave citing vague unease or unexplained phenomena. The house stands on Candlemaker Row. I pass it often. Sometimes I pause and look at the windows. I wonder what scenes play out within, visible only to those cursed with the sight. Dr. Hugh MacLeod, Edinburgh, Scotland, 27th March, 1764. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Property records show unusual tenant turnover at the Candlemaker Row address. Historical research confirms a fatal fire in 1689 and multiple deaths on the premises. Current owners report persistent feelings of being watched and occasional glimpses of figures that vanish when directly observed. End of file. Case file NOA 15888. C. Classification. Blacksmith's testimony. Date of statement 11th June 1588. Location Dartmoor, Devon. Testimony of blacksmith Henry Crow. Says Henry Crow, blacksmith. Do testify regarding my encounter upon Dartmoor. My work required me to deliver tools to a farm near Princetown. The journey crosses open moorland, desolate and exposed. I departed at first light with my pony laden with ironwork. The weather was fair, the visibility good. I made steady progress across the familiar tracks. Around midday, I stopped to rest and water my pony at a stream. As I knelt to drink, I heard music. The sound was faint, but clear, carried on the wind. It was pipe music, played with skill. The melody was unfamiliar, haunting and strange. I looked about, but saw no one. The moor stretched empty in all directions. Yet the music continued. I followed the sound, leading my pony. The music seemed to come from beyond a rise in the land. As I crested the hill, I saw them. A circle of standing stones I had never noticed before. And within the circle, figures danced. There were perhaps 20 of them, men and women both. They wore clothing of rough cloth, ancient in style. They moved in patterns, weaving between the stones. The pipe music came from a small man seated on a rock. His instrument was unlike any I had seen. As I watched, transfixed, one of the dancers noticed me. She stopped and stared in my direction. Her face was beautiful but wrong somehow. Too perfect, too symmetrical. She smiled and beckoned me to join them. I felt a strong compulsion to approach. My feet began moving without conscious thought. I walked toward the stone circle. The other dancers turned to watch me. All wore the same strange smile. All beckoned with pale hands. The music grew louder, more insistent. I was at the edge of the circle when my pony screamed. The sound broke the spell that held me. I looked back at the terrified animal. When I turned to the stones again, everything had changed. The dancers were no longer beautiful. Their faces had become skull-like, flesh rotted and torn. Their fine clothes were rags hanging from skeletal frames. The pipe player's instrument was made of bones. Human finger bones, I realized with horror. They still danced, but now their movements were jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. The music had become discordant, painful to hear. They reached for me with fleshless hands. I ran. My pony needed no urging to flee. We raced across the moor until the stones were far behind. When I finally stopped and looked back, I saw nothing. No stones, no dancers, no music. The rise where I had seen them appeared empty. I completed my delivery and inquired about stone circles in that area. The farmer said there were ancient stones scattered across Dartmoor. Many were associated with old folk tales. He warned me never to enter a stone circle, especially if I heard music. He said they were fairy rings, places where the old people danced. Those who joined their dance were never seen again. Or if they returned, they came back changed. Some emerged after what seemed like minutes to find years had passed. Others went mad, their minds broken by what they had witnessed. I described the location as best I could. The farmer knew the place. He said 3 people had vanished there over the past century. All were found days later, wandering and confused. None could remember where they had been, but all bore strange marks, like burns, upon their hands and feet. I examined my own hands that night. On my right palm was a small circular mark I had not noticed before. It looked like a brand, perfectly round. It has never faded. I have not returned to that part of the moor. I take a longer route to Princetown now, and I never walk the moors alone. Henry Crowe, Blacksmith, Dartmoor, Devon, 11th June 1588. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Multiple stone circles exist in the described area. Local folklore consistently warns against entering them, particularly at dawn and dusk. Several disappearances over the centuries remain unexplained. Modern archaeologists note unusual magnetic properties in some of the stones. Visitors report audio anomalies and temporal disorientation. End of file. Case file NOA 1691K. Classification. Constable's deposition. Date of statement: 8th November 1691. Location: Whitechapel, London. Deposition of Constable Richard Holbrook. Richard Holbrook, Constable of Whitechapel, do make deposition concerning events at the abandoned warehouse on Brick Lane. The warehouse has stood empty these 5 years past. The owner died intestate and the property remains in legal dispute. Local residents have long avoided the building. Children claim to see faces in the windows after dark. Vagrants who shelter there never remain more than one night. I dismissed such tales as superstitious nonsense. My opinion changed 3 nights ago. I was pursuing a thief who fled into the warehouse. I followed with lantern and cudgel. The ground floor was vast, filled with rotting crates and debris. I called out, ordering the thief to surrender. My voice echoed strangely in the space. I heard footsteps above, on the upper floor. I climbed the stairs cautiously. The upper floor was darker, my lantern providing limited illumination. I saw movement in the shadows ahead. I advanced, expecting to find the thief. Instead, I found myself surrounded by figures. They emerged from the darkness on all sides. Men, women, even children. All wore clothing stained and torn. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken deep. They stared at me with expressions of desperate hunger. I demanded they identify themselves. None spoke. They simply advanced slowly, reaching toward me. I raised my lantern to see them better. That is when I noticed their condition. These were not living people. Their skin had the waxy appearance of the dead. Some bore visible injuries, wounds that should have been mortal. A woman had a terrible gash across her throat. A man's skull was crushed on one side. A child's arm hung at an impossible angle. Yet they all moved. All reached for me. I backed away, calling upon God for protection. The figures paused. Then they began to speak. Not in unison, but overlapping voices creating a horrible chorus. Hungry, they moaned. So hungry. Forgotten. Left to starve. I remembered then what this warehouse had been. During the plague years, it served as a temporary hospital. The sick were brought here to die away from healthy populations. Many did die here, abandoned and forgotten. I had read reports of bodies found after the plague passed. Dozens had perished in this very building. The dead surrounded me now, pressing closer. I could smell decay, the stench of death. They reached out with skeletal hands. Their fingers brushed my coat, my face. I felt cold, so cold my teeth chattered. I swung my cudgel wildly, trying to force a path through them. The weapon passed through the figures without resistance. They were insubstantial, like smoke. Yet I felt their touch, cold and terrible. I ran. I crashed through them, feeling their phantom hands clutch at me. I reached the stairs and descended recklessly. Behind me, I heard their voices raised in lamentation, the sound of dozens crying out in hunger and despair. I emerged from the warehouse and did not stop running until I reached the watch house. My fellow constables found me shaking and pale. I reported what I had witnessed. Most thought I had been drinking, but one older man believed me. He said he had heard similar accounts from others who entered that warehouse. He said the plague dead were restless. They had died in agony, alone and abandoned. Their suffering had soaked into the building itself. The thief I pursued was never found. I suspect he encountered the same phenomena and fled. Or perhaps he did not escape. Perhaps he joined the hungry dead who wander that place. I will not enter that warehouse again. I have recommended it be demolished and the ground blessed. My superiors dismissed the suggestion. So the building stands, and the dead within continue their eternal hunger. Richard Holbrook, Constable, Whitechapel, London, 8th November 1691. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Records confirm the warehouse served as a plague hospital in 1665. Over 60 bodies were recovered after the outbreak subsided. The building was demolished in 1723 after a series of deaths and disappearances. However, construction workers on the site reported ongoing phenomena. The location is now occupied by modern buildings, but reports of unexplained cold spots and phantom figures persist. End of file. Case file NOA 1783D. Classification: Sailor's Log Entry. Date of statement: 2nd May 1783. Location: off the coast of Cornwall. Log entry of sailor Thomas Penrose vs. Thomas Penrose, able seaman aboard the merchant vessel Prosperity. Do record strange events during our voyage from Plymouth to Bristol. We departed Plymouth on the 30th of April, with fair weather and full sails. Our cargo was wool and tin. Our crew numbered 12 souls. The first day passed without incident. On the second day, as we rounded Land's End, we encountered thick fog. Visibility reduced to mere yards. The captain ordered reduced speed, and posted extra watches. I was on the afternoon watch when I heard the singing. It came from somewhere ahead in the fog, a woman's voice, clear and beautiful. The song was in a language I did not recognize. The melody was haunting, almost painful in its beauty. I called to my watchmate, asking if he heard it. He confirmed the sound but looked troubled. "Sirens," he whispered. "We must tell the captain." Before we could move, the song grew louder. Other voices joined the first. Multiple women singing in harmony. The sound seemed to come from all directions now. Several crew members appeared on deck, drawn by the music. All wore expressions of wonder. The captain emerged and immediately ordered us to cover our ears. But the sound penetrated anyway. It seemed to resonate inside our skulls. The singing grew more intense. Words in that strange language washed over us. I felt an overwhelming urge to jump overboard, to swim toward the source of that beautiful sound. I saw several crew members moving toward the rail. The captain shouted orders, but no one responded. We were all entranced by the singing. I was at the rail, about to climb over, when the ship struck something. The impact threw me to the deck. The singing stopped abruptly. The fog began to clear. We found ourselves among rocks, the hull scraping against stone. But these were not ordinary rocks. They were too regular, too deliberately placed. As the fog dissipated further, we saw the truth. We had run aground on a formation that resembled ruins. Massive stone blocks arranged in patterns beneath the shallow water. They stretched in all directions, an entire submerged structure. And standing on these stones were figures, women, or things that appeared as women. They stood perfectly still, watching our ship. Their skin had a strange greenish pallor. Their hair was long and moved in the water like seaweed. As we stared, one of them opened her mouth. The beautiful song emerged again. But now we could see the singer's teeth. Rows of them, sharp as needles. Her eyes were black, entirely black. Her fingers were webbed, ending in claws. The others were the same. Beautiful from a distance, monstrous up close. They began to move toward the ship. swimming with unnatural speed and grace. The captain ordered all hands to push us free of the rocks. We worked desperately, using poles and oars. The creatures reached the hull and began climbing. Their clawed hands found purchase on the wood. I saw one pull herself up the side. Her face was mere feet from mine. She smiled, revealing those terrible teeth. She reached for me with webbed hands. I struck at her with an oar. She hissed and dropped back into the water. With a final heave, we pushed free of the rocks. The ship lurched into deeper water. The creatures did not follow. They remained among the ruins, watching us depart. As we sailed away, I looked back. The ruins were sinking from view, or perhaps they had never been there at all. Perhaps they existed in some space between water and air, visible only when the fog permits. The captain has forbidden anyone to speak of what we saw. He fears we would be thought mad, but I make this record for truth. There are things in the sea older than man, things that sing beautiful songs to lure sailors to their doom. We were fortunate to escape. Many ships have disappeared in those waters. Now I understand why. Thomas Penrose, able seaman, aboard the Prosperity, 2nd May, 1783. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Cornwall folklore is rich with tales of mermaids and sea monsters. However, references to submerged ruins off Land's End appear in multiple historical accounts. Sonar surveys have detected unusual formations in the area, though their origin remains disputed. The Prosperity was lost with all hands 6 months after this entry, cause unknown. End of file. Case file. NOA 1637P. Classification. Nun's personal record. Date of statement. 13th December 1637. Location. Convent of St. Agnes, Canterbury. Personal record of Sister Mary Blackwood. Sister Mary Blackwood. Do record events that have troubled our convent these past weeks. Our small community numbers 15 sisters. We live in contemplative silence, dedicated to prayer and work. The disturbances began after Sister Catherine fell ill. She was our eldest member, over 70 years of age. The fever took her quickly. She passed from this world on the 20th of November. We buried her in our small cemetery with proper rites. Mother Superior led the prayers herself. We mourned as was appropriate and returned to our routines. 3 nights after the burial, I was woken by chanting. It came from the chapel, the voices raised in Latin. I assumed some sisters had risen for private devotions. I returned to sleep. The following morning, I mentioned the night prayers. None of my sisters admitted to being in the chapel. All had been asleep in their cells. Yet I knew what I had heard. The next night, I heard it again. The chanting began at precisely midnight. I rose and went to the chapel. The door was closed, but I could hear the voices clearly. They sang the office for the dead. Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine. I opened the door. The chapel was empty, yet the singing continued. It filled the space, echoing from the walls. Multiple voices in perfect harmony. I recognized the cadence, the intonation. It was our choir, our sisters' voices. But none were present. The candles upon the altar flickered. The air grew cold. I saw my breath mist before me. Then I saw her. Sister Catherine stood before the altar. She wore her burial shroud. Her hands were folded in prayer. Her eyes were open but showed no life. Her mouth moved, forming the Latin words. But her voice was not among those I heard. She stood silent while the invisible choir sang around her. I called her name. She turned her head slowly toward me. Her expression was one of terrible sadness. She raised one hand and pointed to the altar. Then she faded, becoming transparent. Within moments, she had vanished completely. But the singing did not stop. It continued for another hour. I remained in the chapel, kneeling in prayer. When the singing finally ceased, I examined the altar. I found nothing unusual there. I reported this to Mother Superior. She was skeptical, but agreed to keep watch the following night. We both heard the choir. We both saw Sister Catherine's ghost. Mother Superior attempted to address the apparition. She commanded it to speak, to reveal what kept it from rest. The ghost pointed again to the altar. Mother Superior searched more thoroughly. Behind the altar cloth, she found a loose stone. Within the cavity was a small box. The box contained letters, yellow with age. They were love letters, written decades ago. They were addressed to Sister Catherine. They were from a man she had known before taking vows. She had hidden them there, unable to destroy them. She had carried this secret for over 40 years. Mother Superior read the letters and then burned them. She blessed the altar and prayed for Sister Catherine's soul. That night, the chanting came again. But it was different. The voices sang not the office for the dead, but hymns of joy. Sister Catherine appeared one final time. She smiled at us. Her face showed peace at last. She bowed to the altar and then to us. She walked down the aisle toward the chapel door. As she reached it, she faded into light and was gone. The singing stopped. We have not heard it since. But sometimes, in the early morning, I smell roses. The scent fills the chapel, though no flowers grow nearby. I believe it is Sister Catherine, free now of her earthly burden, letting us know she has found peace. Sister Mary Blackwood, Convent of St. Agnes, Canterbury, 13th of December, 1637. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The convent closed in 1649 during the Commonwealth period. The building was converted to private housing in 1723. Current residents report occasional Latin chanting and the scent of roses. The altar stone was removed and now resides in Canterbury Cathedral Museum. Visitors to the museum sometimes report feeling watched. End of file. Case file NOA 1705R. Classification. Mine foreman's report. Date of statement 24th August 1705. Location Porthtowan, Cornwall. Report of mine foreman William Trevorrow was William Trevorrow, foreman of the wheel-friendly tin mine. Do report the incident in the lower workings. We have been expanding the mine deeper into the earth. Last week, we broke through into a natural cavern. The opening was unexpected and dangerous. 2 miners nearly fell into the darkness beyond. We secured the area and prepared to explore. The cavern appeared extensive, larger than any we had encountered. I organized a party of 5 men to investigate. We took lamps, rope, and tools. We descended through the opening into the cavern below. The space was vast, our lamps revealing only portions of it. The walls were damp, covered in strange formations. The floor sloped downward into deeper darkness. We heard water dripping somewhere distant. But we also heard something else. A sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic. It seemed to come from the cavern itself. We proceeded cautiously, marking our path. As we moved deeper, we found carvings on the walls. They were old, very old. Not the work of any miners we knew. The symbols were unfamiliar, possibly ancient. One of my men, a Cornishman who knew the old stories, went pale. He said the symbols were warnings. He said we should leave immediately. I insisted we continue our survey. We had a responsibility to chart any new passages. The cavern continued deeper than seemed natural. The air grew warmer as we descended. This was unusual, as mines typically grow colder with depth. The breathing sound grew louder. It was definitely not water or wind. It had an organic quality, like something living. We came to a chamber where the floor leveled. In the center was a pool of water. The water was perfectly still, black as ink. We could not see the bottom despite our lamps. Around the pool were more carvings and bones, many bones arranged in patterns. Some appeared human, others were from animals we could not identify. The breathing sound was loudest here. It seemed to come from the pool itself. As we watched, the water's surface began to ripple. Something was rising from below. We saw a shape beneath the surface. It was large, much larger than any man. It moved with sinuous grace, ascending toward us. My men backed away from the pool. I ordered a retreat. We turned to leave. The breathing sound became a roar. The water exploded upward behind us. We ran without looking back. We could hear something pursuing us. Something massive, scraping against the stone. It moved faster than seemed possible. We reached the rope and climbed frantically. As the last man cleared the opening, I looked down. I saw it. A thing of tentacles and teeth and eyes. Too many eyes reflecting our lamplight. It reached for us with appendages too long for its body. We pulled the last man through and sealed the opening. We used timber and iron to bar the hole. From beyond, we heard scratching, testing the barrier, seeking a way through. I reported to the mine owner. He ordered that section permanently sealed. We filled the passage with rubble and stone. We no longer mine in that direction, but sometimes, deep in the night shift, we hear things, sounds from below, breathing, scratching, waiting. The old Cornishman says we disturbed something that was better left alone. He says the ancient people knew it was there. They carved warnings to keep others away. We did not heed those warnings. Now we live with what we woke. William Trevorrow, Foreman Wheel Friendly Mine, Port Tawan, 24th August, 1705. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The wheel-friendly mine closed in 1798 after a series of fatal accidents. The sealed section was never reopened. Modern cave explorers have identified unusual acoustic properties in Cornish mines that could explain some reported sounds. However, the described carvings and bone arrangements have never been verified. The mine entrance is now permanently sealed. End of file. Case file NOA 159-6 T. Classification Vickers Incident Report. Date of statement 7th January 1596. Location St. Peter's Church, Exeter. Incident report of Reverend Simon Brewster I. Reverend Simon Brewster, Vicar of St. Peter's Church, do report the disturbing events of Twelfth Night. We held evening service as customary. The church was well attended, perhaps 40 parishioners. All proceeded normally through prayers and readings. I began the sermon on the Epiphany. As I spoke, I noticed the temperature dropping rapidly. My breath became visible. I saw parishioners pulling their cloaks tighter. Then the candles began to dim, not extinguish, but the flames shrank to small points of light. The church became shadowy, barely illuminated. I continued preaching, assuming a draught had affected the candles. A woman in the front pew screamed. She pointed toward the back of the church. I looked and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a man dressed in the robes of a priest, but the robes were from an earlier century, ornate and old-fashioned. The figure stood motionless, watching us. I called out, asking him to identify himself. He did not respond. He began walking down the center aisle toward the altar. His footsteps made no sound upon the stone floor. As he passed the pews, parishioners shrank away. His face was visible now in the dim light. It was deathly pale, the features sharp and severe. His eyes were dark hollows. He showed no expression, no emotion. He walked past me and stood before the altar. He raised his hands as if to bless the congregation. Then he spoke. The voice was hollow, echoing unnaturally. He spoke Latin, but the words were wrong. They were prayers, but inverted, corrupted. He was performing a black mass, desecrating the sacred liturgy. I commanded him to cease in the name of Christ. He turned his head slowly toward me. His mouth opened impossibly wide. From within came not words, but a terrible sound, a shrieking that hurt the ears and soul alike. The altar candles exploded into tall flames. The communion vessels flew from the altar, crashing to the floor. The large crucifix above the altar began to shake. Parishioners fled in terror. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The figure approached me. I could smell decay, the stench of the grave. He reached out one hand toward my face. His fingers were long, skeletal, tipped with broken nails. I managed to raise my own cross, holding it between us. The figure recoiled as if struck. He let out another shriek. His form began to shimmer and distort. I recited the Lord's Prayer, my voice shaking but growing stronger. With each word, the figure grew less substantial. By the time I finished the prayer, he had vanished completely. The candles returned to normal brightness. The temperature rose. The church was empty save for myself and 3 parishioners who had remained. We found the communion vessels scattered across the floor. The wine had turned to what appeared as blood. The bread was covered in mold, though it had been fresh hours before. I searched the church records that night. I found reference to a priest who served St. Peter's in the year 1412. Father Edmund Carver was removed from his position for heretical practices. He was accused of performing forbidden rituals within the church. He died in the bishop's prison before trial. His body was buried in unconsecrated ground, but his ghost, it seems, returned to the church he defiled. I have performed multiple blessings and consecrations. I have prayed for Father Carver's soul despite his sins. The church has been quiet since 12th night, but I sense his presence still, watching from the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to corrupt the sacred. Reverend Simon Brewster, St. Peter's Church, Exeter, 7th January 1596. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft Church. Records confirm Father Edmund Carver's disgrace and death in 1412. St. Peter's was extensively renovated in 1605, possibly in response to ongoing supernatural disturbances. The church was destroyed by bombing in 1942. The ruins still stand, and locals report seeing a robed figure among the rubble on 12th night. End of file. Case file NOA 1724W. Classification: Tavern keeper's account. Date of statement: 19th October 1724. Location: the Swan Inn, Cambridge. Account of tavern keeper: Edmund Walsh Fair. Edmund Walsh, keeper of the Swan Inn. Do account the haunting of the cellar beneath my establishment. The cellar is old, older than the current building. It dates from medieval times, with vaulted stone ceilings. We store ale barrels and wine there. Until recently, I thought nothing unusual about the space. Last month, my serving girl refused to fetch ale from below. She claimed to have seen someone in the cellar. A child, she said, standing among the barrels. She called out, but the child ran into the shadows. She searched but found no one. I thought she was inventing excuses to avoid work. I sent my son down instead. He returned white-faced and empty-handed. He had seen the child as well. A boy of perhaps 8 years, dressed in rags. The child stared at him and then vanished behind the barrels. My son searched thoroughly, but found nothing. I decided to investigate personally. I descended into the cellar with a good lantern. The space was as I had always known it. Barrels arranged in rows, stone walls, packed earth floor. I saw no child. I was about to leave when I heard crying, soft sobbing coming from the far corner. I walked toward the sound. As I rounded the last row of barrels, I saw him. A small boy crouched against the wall. His clothes were torn and filthy. His face was streaked with tears and dirt. He looked up at me with terrified eyes. I asked gently who he was and how he came to be there. He shrank away from me. I noticed his wrists bore marks, as if he had been bound. I asked if someone had hurt him. He nodded slowly. Then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. The master put me down here, said I was wicked, said I must learn. I asked how long ago this happened. I don't remember. It's always dark. I'm so hungry. I offered to bring him food and help. I turned to ascend the stairs. When I looked back, he was gone. I searched every corner. The cellar was empty. I questioned elderly residents about the inn's history. One old woman remembered a story from her grandmother's time. In the year 1660, a boy apprenticed to the innkeeper disappeared. He was accused of stealing and beaten. The innkeeper locked him in the cellar for punishment. But the innkeeper took ill and died suddenly. No one knew the boy was imprisoned below. By the time the new owner found him, weeks had passed. The child had died in the darkness, alone and forgotten. He was buried in a pauper's grave with no marker. I have seen him many times since, always in the same corner, always crying. Sometimes I hear him calling for help, the voice of a child abandoned and left to die. I bring food and leave it in the cellar. By morning, it is untouched. The dead cannot eat, but I cannot bear his cries. I have tried prayers and blessings. Nothing releases him from his prison. He remains in the darkness, eternally hungry, eternally afraid, waiting for a rescue that will never come. Edmund Walsh, Tavern Keeper, The Swan Inn, Cambridge 19th. October 1724 archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Cambridge Parish Records show an unidentified child buried in 1660, cause of death listed as misadventure. The Swan Inn was demolished in 1892. However, the cellar structure was incorporated into the new building. Current occupants continue to report a child's crying and sightings of a young boy. Food left out overnight is sometimes found scattered, as if handled by small hands. End of file. Case file NOA 1672B. Classification University. Don's notes. Date of statement 22nd March 1672. Location Oxford University, Oxfordshire. Notes of Don Arthur Wickham verse. Arthur Wickham, Fellow of Magdalen College, do record unusual events in the library's manuscript collection. My work involves cataloguing medieval texts recently acquired by the college. I spend long hours alone in the special collections room. The room is located in the oldest part of the library. It is quiet, windowless, lit only by candles. Last week, I was examining a 13th century Psalter. The text was in Latin, beautifully illuminated. As I turned the pages, I noticed something strange. The margins contained annotations in a different hand. The annotations were in medieval English, barely legible. They appeared to be warnings. Speak not the words aloud. The text holds power beyond holy use. Brother Martin learned too late. I was intrigued by these cryptic notes. I continued through the Psalter carefully. Near the end, I found a section that seemed out of place. The text shifted from Psalms to something else entirely. Words in a language I did not recognize. Not Latin, not Greek, not Hebrew. Something older. The illuminations here were disturbing. They showed figures with too many limbs, faces that were almost human but subtly wrong, symbols that hurt to look at directly. I felt compelled to read the text aloud. The words felt strange on my tongue. The pronunciation came to me unbidden, as if I had always known it. As I spoke, the candles flickered. The air in the room grew heavy. I felt pressure building in my skull. I continued reading, unable to stop. The words flowed faster, becoming a chant. The room darkened despite the candles. Shadows gathered in the corners, thick and moving. I heard breathing that was not my own. I felt watched by many eyes. Finally, the passage ended. I gasped, as if surfacing from deep water. The pressure released. The shadows retreated. But the room felt different now, changed somehow. I heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the room. I looked up. A figure emerged from between the book stacks. It wore a monk's habit of ancient style. The face was hidden by the cowl. It moved with a gliding motion, feet invisible beneath the robe. I stood, calling out identification. The figure stopped. It raised both hands to its hood and slowly pulled it back. I wish I had not seen what lay beneath. The face was human in basic structure, but the proportions were wrong, elongated and twisted. The eyes were too large, entirely black. The mouth stretched too wide, filled with too many teeth. It spoke in a voice like grinding stone. You have read the words. You have opened the way. I tried to respond, but could not form words. Terror had frozen my voice. The thing that had been a monk stepped closer. Others will come now. They have heard the summons. I managed to grab the Psalter and run. I fled the special collections room. Behind me, I heard laughter. Not one voice, but many. Echoing through the library stacks, I reported to the head librarian. He examined the Psalter skeptically. He saw only a normal medieval text. The strange language had vanished. The disturbing illuminations appeared as standard religious art. Even the marginal warnings were gone. I insisted on what I had seen. He suggested I had been working too hard, seeing things in fatigue. But I know the truth. I opened something that night. I invited something into our world. Since then, I hear whispers in the library. I see movements in the shadows between shelves. Other fellows have complained of similar experiences. Books are found open to pages they did not select. Texts appear that were not there before. The library feels watched, occupied. And late at night, in the special collections room, footsteps pace endlessly, back and forth among the ancient manuscripts, searching for something, or perhaps waiting for someone foolish enough to read the words again. Arthur Wickham, Fellow Magdalen College, Oxford, 22nd March, 1672. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The described psalter cannot be located in Magdalen College's current collection. Records show it was transferred to the Bodleian Library in 1680, then mysteriously lost in 1682. Multiple Oxford libraries report ongoing phenomena consistent with Wickham's account. Several scholars have disappeared or suffered mental breakdowns while researching medieval manuscripts. Current policy requires special approval for access to pre-14th century texts. End of file. Case file. NOA 1749L. Classification. Coachman statement. Date of statement. 6th February 1749. Location. Great North Road, Yorkshire. Statement of Coachman George Hartwell. Tenth George Hartwell, Coachman. Do make statement regarding my encounter on the Great North Road. I have driven this route for 20 years without incident. I transport passengers between York and Newcastle regularly. I know every mile of the road, every inn and landmark. Last week, I was returning to York with an empty coach. The journey commenced at noon under clear skies. By evening, I was making good progress. I planned to reach the next coaching inn by nightfall. As darkness descended, I noticed fog gathering. It rose from the moorland, thick and white. Within minutes, visibility reduced to mere feet. I slowed the horses to a walk. I knew the road well enough to continue carefully. Then I saw lights ahead. Lanterns or torches, I thought, marking an inn or dwelling. I urged the horses forward, seeking shelter from the fog. As I approached, I realized the lights were not from any building. They floated in the air, perhaps 8 feet above the ground. They were arranged in a row across the road. I pulled the horses to a stop. The lights remained stationary, blocking my path. I called out, thinking perhaps someone needed assistance. The lights began to move. They drifted toward me in formation. As they drew closer, I saw they were not lanterns. They were orbs of pale luminescence, casting no beam. They simply existed, floating impossibly. The horses became agitated. They stamped and whinnied, trying to back away. I held the reins firmly. The lights surrounded the coach. I counted 13 of them, circling slowly. The air grew cold. I could see my breath in clouds. Then I heard the voices. Whispering came from all directions. Many voices speaking at once. I could not make out words, only the susurrus of urgent communication. The lights began to pulse, brightening and dimming in rhythm. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. I felt a terrible dread settle over me. Some primal part of my mind screamed at me to flee. But I was surrounded, trapped. One of the lights drifted close to my face. I could feel heat from it, like standing near a fire. Within the glow, I saw shapes. Faces formed and dissolved. Expressions of anguish, terror, rage. Dozens of faces appearing and vanishing, all looking at me, all trying to speak. I understood then what these were. Souls, trapped between life and death, unable to move on, unable to return. They clustered here on the lonely road, drawing travelers into their company. I gripped my cross and prayed aloud. The moment I began the prayer, the lights recoiled. They retreated several feet. The whispering became angry, frustrated. I continued praying, my voice growing stronger. With each word, the lights dimmed further. Finally, they winked out one by one. The fog began to lift. Within minutes, the road was clear. I could see stars above. I urged the horses forward quickly. I did not stop until I reached the inn. I inquired about the stretch of road where I encountered the lights. The innkeeper's expression grew grim. He said many travelers had seen the floating lights. The road passed near the site of an old gibbet. Criminals were hanged there for over a century, their bodies left to rot as warnings. The innkeeper believed their souls lingered, unable to rest due to the manner of their deaths. They sought the living, trying to communicate, or perhaps trying to drag others into their endless waiting. Several travelers had vanished on that road over the years, found days later wandering the moors, their minds broken, unable to speak. Some simply disappeared entirely. I have altered my route. I now take a longer path that avoids that cursed stretch. I will not risk the lights again. I will not join those trapped souls. George Hartwell, coachman, Great North Road, Yorkshire. 6th February 1749. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Historical records confirm a gibbet stood at the described location until 1756. Over 300 executions occurred there between 1600 and 1750. The phenomenon of corpse candles or ghost lights is widely reported in that area. Modern investigations attribute the lights to marsh gas, though this fails to explain the voices and apparitions. The road was rerouted in 1820, but hikers still report similar experiences. End of file. Case file NOA 1653. N classification. Manor servant's testimony. Date of statement 10th September 1653. Location Ashby Hall, Lincolnshire. Testimony of servant Elizabeth Norton Fuss. Elizabeth Norton, chambermaid at Ashby Hall, do testify regarding the haunting of the master bedroom. I have served in this house for 5 years. Until last month, I believed ghosts were mere superstition. I no longer hold that belief. The troubles began when Lord Ashby brought home a portrait. He purchased it at an estate auction in London. The painting depicted a woman of middle age, finely dressed. Her expression was severe, her eyes dark and penetrating. Lord Ashby hung the portrait in the master bedroom above the fireplace. He said it reminded him of his late mother. Within days, strange occurrences commenced. Lady Ashby complained of feeling watched while dressing. She said the portrait's eyes seemed to follow her movement. Lord Ashby dismissed this as fancy. Then, objects began to move. Jewellery disappeared from Lady Ashby's dressing table. It would reappear days later in different locations. Hairbrushes were found in drawers they had not been placed in. Clothing was discovered pulled from wardrobes and scattered. I was blamed for this initially. I swore I had not touched these items. Lady Ashby believed me, having witnessed some movements herself. She saw a hairbrush slide across the table with no one near it. She watched her jewellery box open by itself. She became frightened of her own bedroom. The situation worsened considerably. Lady Ashby began having nightmares. She dreamed of the woman in the portrait. In the dreams, the woman would stand at the foot of the bed. She would point accusingly at Lady Ashby. Her mouth would move, but no sound emerged. Lady Ashby would wake gasping, convinced someone had been in the room. I was assigned to sleep in the chamber to provide comfort. On my first night there, I witnessed the phenomenon myself. I woke near dawn to movement. The woman from the portrait stood beside Lady Ashby's bed. She was translucent, like coloured glass. I could see the bed curtains through her form. She wore the same dress as in the painting. Her face bore the same severe expression. She leaned over Lady Ashby, examining her closely. I tried to cry out, but my voice failed. The apparition turned to look at me. Her eyes were black voids. Looking into them brought overwhelming sorrow. I felt the weight of her grief, her anger. She raised one hand and pointed at the portrait. Then at Lady Ashby. Then back to the portrait. I understood somehow what she wanted. She wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to not be forgotten. She faded slowly, her form dissolving into morning light. I told Lady Ashby what I had witnessed. We examined the portrait more carefully. On the back of the canvas, we found writing, a name, Margaret Ashby, and dates, 1580 to 1647. We researched the family records. Margaret Ashby had been Lord Ashby's great-great-grandmother. She had been a formidable woman, managing the estate after her husband's death. She was painted late in life by a travelling artist. After her death, the family dispersed her possessions. The portrait was sold and passed through several hands. It had been away from Ashby Hall for over a century. Lady Ashby proposed a solution. She suggested we move the portrait to the gallery, a place of honour where family portraits were displayed, where Margaret would be properly remembered. We did so that very day. The haunting ceased immediately. No more objects moved. No more nightmares plagued Lady Ashby. The bedroom returned to peace. But sometimes, when I clean the gallery, I pause before Margaret's portrait. I swear her expression has softened. The severe look has eased. She appears almost satisfied, as if she has finally come home. Elizabeth Norton, chambermaid, Ashby Hall, Lincolnshire, 10th September 1653. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The portrait of Margaret Ashby remains in the Ashby Hall gallery. Family members report feeling a protective presence in the house, particularly in times of trouble. The portrait was nearly sold again in 1789, but the family decided to keep it after several members experienced disturbing dreams, warning against its removal. End of file. Case file NOA 1718F. Classification: Gravedigger's account. Date of statement: 15th April 1718. Location: Highgate Cemetery, London. Account of gravedigger Samuel Ridge Verse, Samuel Ridge, gravedigger of Highgate Cemetery. Do account events that have disturbed my work these past months. I have tended graves for 30 years. I am accustomed to death and its trappings. I fear no corpse, no darkness, no solitude among the tombs. But what I have witnessed recently challenges my understanding. It began in January when I was digging a new grave. The work was in the oldest section, among monuments from the previous century. As I dug, my spade struck something hard. I assumed it was a stone or root. But when I cleared the soil, I found a coffin. It was not where any coffin should be. It lay at an angle, as if it had moved from its proper resting place. The wood was rotten, the lid partially collapsed. I could see within. The occupant was not as I expected. Bodies decompose in predictable ways, but this corpse appeared fresh, as if recently interred. The flesh showed no decay. The features were intact. The hands were positioned oddly, clawing upward, as if the person had been trying to escape. I reported this to the cemetery keeper. He was troubled but suggested the burial had been more recent than records indicated. We reburied the coffin properly and continued with the new grave. That night, I remained late to complete the work. As darkness fell, I heard scratching sounds. They came from the ground near where I had found the misplaced coffin. I investigated with my lantern. The earth above that grave was disturbed. Something had pushed up from below. Clods of soil lay scattered around a small opening. I peered into the hole. I saw movement in the darkness below. Pale hands reaching upward. I stumbled backward in shock. As I watched, more earth was displaced from within. The hands emerged fully, grasping at the edges of the hole. Arms followed, thin and white. Then a head appeared. It was the corpse I had seen earlier, the same preserved face, now twisted with effort. The eyes were open, staring blindly. The mouth gaped, gasping though no breath came. It pulled itself from the grave inch by inch. I was frozen, unable to flee or cry out. The thing that had been buried dragged itself completely free. It lay on the ground, shuddering. Then it stood. The movements were jerky, uncoordinated, like a puppet controlled by an unpracticed hand. It turned toward me. I finally found my voice and ran. Behind me, I heard it following. The footsteps were uneven but persistent. I did not look back until I reached the cemetery gate. When I turned, the path was empty. I reported this to the keeper. He thought I had been drinking. But the next morning, we found evidence. The grave was opened from within. A trail of disturbed earth led away into the older section. We followed it to a mausoleum. The door stood open, though it had been locked. Inside, we found the corpse. It lay before a particular tomb, hands pressed against the stone. The name on the tomb was Elizabeth Harrow. The corpse was that of Thomas Harrow, Elizabeth's husband. Records showed he died in 1716. His wife Elizabeth died 3 months later, but she was buried in a different cemetery in her family plot. Thomas had been interred alone, separated from his beloved wife. The keeper theorized that somehow Thomas sought Elizabeth still, that his will to reunite with her had prevented true death. We moved his remains to lie beside Elizabeth's. The rector performed prayers for both souls. Since then, Thomas has rested quietly, but other graves have begun to show similar signs. Earth pushed up from within, scratching sounds in the night, coffins found displaced or opened. I believe many here do not rest peacefully. Some remain aware, trapped in their graves. They struggle against the earth. They seek escape, or reunion, or simply the light they have lost. I hear them on quiet nights. The sound of dozens scratching, pushing, trying to break free. Most fail. The earth reclaims them, but some manage to emerge. I find them wandering the cemetery at dawn, always lost, always searching, never finding what they seek. Samuel Ridge, Gravedigger. Highgate Cemetery, London, 15th April, 1718. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft Highgate Cemetery records confirm Thomas Harrow's burial in 1716. His wife Elizabeth was indeed buried elsewhere. The described mausoleum still stands. Modern cemetery workers report persistent sounds of scratching beneath certain graves, though excavations reveal no disturbances. Electronic recording equipment captures unexplained noises consistent with movement beneath the earth. The phenomenon defies explanation. End of file. Case file. NOA 1621H. Classification. Apothecary's Journal Entry. Date of statement, 28th July, 1621. Location, Bristol, Somerset. Journal entry of Apothecary Robert Finch I. Robert Finch, Apothecary. Do record a disturbing medical consultation. A woman came to my shop 3 days past seeking remedy for her son. She identified herself as Mistress Anne Godwin. Her son, Peter, aged 12 years, suffered from unusual symptoms. He complained of voices speaking to him constantly. The voices came not from outside, but from within his own thoughts. They told him secrets about people he had never met. They described events before they occurred. They commanded him to perform strange actions. I examined the boy carefully. His physical health appeared sound. No fever, no signs of illness or injury. But his behavior was profoundly disturbed. He stared at empty spaces as if watching something. He responded to questions I had not asked. He spoke of things he should not know. He told me my father had died when I was young. He described the manner of death accurately. He said my mother remarried a cruel man who beat her. All of this was true, though I had never spoken of it. He knew intimate details of my childhood, things no stranger could possibly know. I asked how he came by this information. They tell me, he said simply, the ones who walk beside everyone, the ones only I can see. He pointed to the empty air beside me. There is a woman standing next to you. She has grey hair and kind eyes. She is your mother. My mother had died 2 years prior. I felt cold despite the summer heat. The boy continued describing her appearance with perfect accuracy. He relayed messages he claimed came from her, personal messages about matters only she and I had discussed. I was shaken, but attempted to maintain professional composure. I asked about the other voices, the commands. Peter's expression darkened. Not all of them are kind like your mother. Some are angry, some are hungry. He described entities that whispered terrible suggestions. They urged him to harm himself and others. They showed him visions of violence and death. They promised power if he would obey their instructions. His mother wept as he spoke. She said the voices had begun 6 months ago. At first, Peter spoke to dead relatives, sharing memories he should not possess. This had seemed a blessing, a gift, but the gift had turned dark. Other spirits had noticed Peter's ability to perceive them. They crowded around him constantly, some seeking help, some seeking mischief, and some seeking far worse. I prescribed herbs to calm his mind and aid sleep, but I held little hope for their effectiveness. This was no medical condition I recognized. I suggested they consult the clergy. Mistress Godwin admitted they had already done so. The priest performed blessings and prayers. The spirits retreated temporarily, but always returned. They seemed drawn to Peter like moths to flame. I saw them again 2 weeks later. Peter's condition had worsened dramatically. He no longer slept. The voices had become a constant roar in his mind. He could no longer distinguish his own thoughts from theirs. He had begun speaking in voices not his own. Old voices, young voices, male and female. Dozens of personalities manifesting through his mouth. Most disturbing was his appearance. His eyes had changed. They shifted color as he spoke. Brown, then blue, then green. As if different souls looked out through them. His face would contort into expressions foreign to a child. The aged weariness of an old man. The coquettish smile of a young woman. The murderous rage of a violent soul. I consulted my books desperately. I found references to similar cases in ancient texts. They spoke of individuals who became doorways, portals through which the dead could communicate with the living. Such people were both blessed and cursed. The dead would never leave them alone. I visited Peter one final time last week. He sat in his room, bound to a chair for his own safety. He no longer responded to his name. Dozens of voices spoke through him in rapid succession. Some pleaded for help, some cursed the living, some simply screamed. His parents had aged years in mere months. They asked if I could do anything more. I admitted I could not. I suggested confinement in an asylum, but I feared even that would provide no relief. Peter was lost, consumed by the voices, his own soul drowned out by the chorus of the dead. I pray I never encounter such a case again. Robert Finch, Apothecary, Bristol, Somerset, 28th July, 1621. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft parish records show Peter Godwin was committed to an asylum in August 1621. He died there 3 months later, age 12. The cause of death was listed as exhaustion and mania. Witnesses reported he spoke in multiple voices until the moment of death. His final words, in his own voice, were finally quiet. Modern psychology might classify this as dissociative disorder, but the verified knowledge of strangers' private histories remains unexplained. End of file. Case file NOA1756S. Classification. Estate Manager's Report. Date of statement 3rd March 1756. Location Wollerton Hall, Nottinghamshire. Report of Estate Manager Francis Thornton I. Francis Thornton, Estate Manager of Wollerton Hall, do report disturbances in the Great Library. The library contains over 5,000 volumes collected across generations. It occupies the entire west wing of the manor. The collection includes rare manuscripts and books of considerable value. My duties include maintaining the catalogue and preserving the volumes. Last month, I began finding books out of place. Volumes removed from shelves and left open on reading tables. I assumed servants had failed to return them properly. I issued reminders about proper handling procedures, but the occurrences increased. Each morning, I found more books displaced. Always open to specific passages, I began to notice patterns in the selections. The opened passages all dealt with death, the afterlife, or supernatural phenomena. One morning, I found 15 books arranged in a circle on the floor, all open to pages discussing spirits and hauntings. No servant admitted to this arrangement. I spent a night in the library to catch the culprit. I positioned myself in a concealed alcove with a view of the main reading room. I brought a lantern but kept it shuttered. I waited in darkness as the hours passed. Near midnight, I heard movement. Soft footsteps on the wooden floor. I peered from my hiding place. A figure moved between the shelves. It appeared to be a man in a long coat and old-fashioned wig. He walked with purpose, pulling volumes from shelves. I watched as he carried books to a table and opened them. He studied each page intently before moving to the next volume. I decided to confront this intruder. I emerged from the alcove and opened my lantern fully. The sudden light illuminated the reading room. The figure at the table looked up at me. I recognized the face from a portrait in the manor's hall. Sir Francis Willoughby, who built Wollerton Hall 2 centuries prior. He had been dead since 1596, yet he sat before me, as solid and real as any living man. He showed no surprise at my presence. He simply returned his attention to the book before him. I approached slowly, my rational mind denying what I witnessed. "Sir Francis?" I ventured. He looked up again and nodded slightly. "You can see me, then? Good. Perhaps you can help." His voice was clear, bearing an accent from an earlier age. I asked what he sought. "Answers," he said. "I have been trapped here since my passing. I do not understand why. These books contain knowledge of the spirit realm. I read them each night, searching for explanation." I observed him closely. He appeared entirely corporeal. I could see no sign he was a phantom, yet I knew he could not be living. I asked if he understood his situation. "I am aware that I am dead," he replied calmly. "I attended my own funeral. I watched them place my body in the crypt, but I did not depart. I remained in this house. I have remained for 160 years. He gestured to the book surrounding us. I seek to understand the mechanism by which souls transition from this world to the next. Mine has failed to operate properly. I inquired whether he had attempted to leave the hall. I cannot, he said. Some invisible boundary constrains me. I can move freely within the walls I built, but no further. He described his existence as neither living nor dead. He experienced no pain, no hunger, no fatigue, but neither did he experience any peace. He was aware of time passing. He watched generations of his descendants live and die. He observed changes to his beloved hall. He saw his collection grow with new acquisitions, but he remained apart from it all, an observer who could not participate, a resident who could not truly inhabit. He asked if I had encountered any information that might free him. I admitted I had not, but I offered to research the matter. He seemed grateful for this kindness. Since that night, I have seen him regularly, always in the library, always reading. Sometimes he speaks with me about his findings. He has developed elaborate theories about spiritual mechanics. He believes he is bound to the hall through some quality of his own soul. Perhaps his love for the building was so intense it became a chain. Perhaps some unfinished business holds him. Or perhaps he simply does not know how to let go. I have grown accustomed to his presence. He is courteous and scholarly, exactly as accounts describe him in life. We share the library, the living and the dead, both seeking knowledge in these ancient volumes, both hoping to understand mysteries that may have no answers. Francis Thornton, Estate Manager, Wollerton Hall, Nottinghamshire, 3rd March, 1756. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Sir Francis Willoughby, died in 1596. Wollerton Hall staff and visitors consistently report seeing a man in Elizabethan dress in the library. He has been photographed numerous times, always near the book collection. The phenomenon is so well documented that the hall includes information about the scholarly ghost in official tours. He remains the building's most permanent resident. End of file. Case file NOA 1689V. Classification: Midwives. Testimony. Date of statement: 19th January 1689. Location: Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire. Testimony of midwife Joan Merrick verse. Joan Merrick, midwife. Do testify regarding events at the Harper cottage. I was summoned to attend Mistress Sarah Harper in her confinement. This was to be her first child, and the labour proved difficult. I arrived at the cottage near sunset. Mistress Harper's pains had begun that morning, but progressed slowly. Her husband, John Harper, was present and anxious. The cottage was small, consisting of 2 rooms and a loft. We settled Mistress Harper in the bedchamber. As the hours passed, I grew concerned. The child was positioned poorly and refused to turn. The mother weakened with each hour. Near midnight, I sent John to fetch the physician. I feared for both mother and child. Alone with Mistress Harper, I did what I could to ease her suffering. That is when I noticed the child, a girl of perhaps 4 years, stood in the corner of the room. She wore a simple dress and watched us with solemn eyes. I asked Mistress Harper who the child was. She looked where I pointed and saw nothing. "There is no child," she gasped between pains. I looked again. The girl remained, now closer to the bed. She stared at Mistress Harper with an expression of deep sadness. I felt sudden cold, a chill that raised the hairs on my neck. "Can you not see her?" I asked. Mistress Harper shook her head weakly. The girl approached the bedside. She reached out one small hand toward Mistress Harper's swollen belly. I tried to intercede, to push the child away. My hands passed through her as if through smoke. The girl was not flesh. She was something else. A spirit, a phantom, an apparition. She touched Mistress Harper's belly. Her hand sank into the flesh. Mistress Harper screamed a cry of pure agony. Her body convulsed. I prepared for the worst, but instead, the child within suddenly moved. I felt it shift position correctly. The birth proceeded rapidly after that. Within an hour, I delivered a healthy baby girl. But as I cut the cord, I noticed something wrong. The infant did not cry. She lay silent, eyes open but unseeing. I cleaned her, rubbed her, tried every method to rouse her. She remained still. I realized with horror that the child was stillborn. She had died during the difficult labor. Mistress Harper wept when I told her. She held the tiny body, rocking and sobbing. The physician arrived too late to help. He confirmed my assessment. The child had perished, likely hours before birth. As we prepared to take the small body away, I saw the ghost child again. She stood beside the bed, gazing at the infant. Then she looked at me and smiled. It was a smile of profound relief. She nodded once, as if in thanks. Then she faded, becoming translucent. Within seconds, she had vanished completely. I questioned the Harpers about previous occupants of the cottage. John Harper knew little of its history, but a neighbor woman provided information. 4 years past, a family named Blackwell had lived there. They had a daughter, Emma, aged 4. The child sickened suddenly and died within days. The mother, mad with grief, took her own life. The father abandoned the cottage and moved away. Emma Blackwell had died in that very bedchamber. I believe her spirit remained, trapped in the place of her death. When Mistress Harper's child died, Emma's spirit somehow knew. She had guided the birth, positioning the baby for delivery. She had done what she could to save the infant, and when she failed, she had finally allowed herself to depart. Perhaps she had been waiting for another child. Perhaps she sought to prevent a mother's grief like her own mother had suffered. I have thought often about that night, about the ghost child who tried to help, about the tiny life that could not be saved, about spirits that linger, seeking to complete tasks left undone. The Harper cottage stands empty now. No one will live where 2 children died, but I have heard the neighbor say she sometimes sees a light in the window, a soft glow, like a candle carried by a small hand. Joan Merrick, midwife, Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire, 19th January, 1689. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, parish records confirm Emma Blackwell's death in 1685 and her mother's suicide shortly after. The Harper infant's burial is recorded in January 1689. The cottage was demolished in 1743, but the site remains vacant. Local residents avoid it, claiming to hear a child crying on certain nights. Some report seeing a small figure in a white dress standing where the cottage once stood. End of file. Case file. NOA 1735, M classification. Theatre manager's account. Date of statement: 11th May, 1735. Location: Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, London. Account of theatre manager Walter Kemp. Walter Kemp, manager of the Theatre Royal. Do account the haunting that plagues our establishment. The theatre has operated for over 60 years with great success. We have hosted the finest performers in London, but we have also hosted something far less welcome. The troubles are centered upon the upper gallery. Patrons report feeling watched during performances. They describe cold spots despite the crowded warmth of the theatre. Some claim to see a figure sitting alone in the highest seats, a man in clothing from decades past. He appears during performances, watching intently. When approached, he vanishes. I dismiss these accounts as imagination fueled by theatrical atmosphere. Then I encountered him myself. I was inspecting the upper gallery after a performance. The theatre was empty. The cast and crew departed. I walked through the rows checking for damage or lost items. In the last row, in the corner seat, sat a man. He wore a long coat and wide-brimmed hat of old fashion. He stared at the empty stage below. I asked him to leave, as the theatre was closing. He did not respond or acknowledge my presence. I approached closer. His face was gaunt, the skin waxy. His eyes were fixed ahead, unblinking. I reached out to touch his shoulder. My hand passed through him. I felt intense cold, as if I had plunged my hand into ice water. The figure slowly turned his head toward me. His expression was one of infinite sorrow. Then he was gone, simply ceased to exist. The seat where he sat was empty. I investigated the theatre's history thoroughly. I discovered a tragedy from the year 1672. An actor named Thomas Grimshaw had performed here regularly. He was beloved by audiences for his tragic roles. One night, during a performance of a play involving death scenes, he collapsed on stage. He died before the audience, who initially thought it part of the performance. They applauded even as he breathed his last. The realization came only when he did not rise for his curtain call. Thomas Grimshaw had given his final performance and received his final applause. He died doing what he loved most. But his spirit, it seems, could not leave the theatre. Since that night, he has been seen regularly, always in the upper gallery, his favorite viewing spot when not performing, always watching whatever play unfolds upon his stage. The performers know of him. Some claim he brings good fortune to productions. Others swear that poor performances anger him. One actress reported seeing him shake his head in disapproval during her scene. She said it drove her to improve her craft. Last month, we staged a revival of the play, during which he died. The actor playing the death scene claimed someone whispered to him from off stage. The whisper provided line corrections he had forgotten. He looked into the wings and saw Thomas Grimshaw standing there. The ghost nodded approval and faded. The performance was flawless. I have grown accustomed to our resident spirit. He causes no harm, seeks no attention. He simply continues his love affair with the theatre. Some nights, when I lock the building, I glance up at the gallery. I often see him there, a darker shadow among shadows, waiting for the next performance, waiting for the curtain to rise on plays he will never perform again, but will watch forever. Walter Kemp, Theatre Manager, Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, London, 11th May, 1735. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Thomas Grimshaw's death is documented in theatre records from 1672. His grave is in St. Paul's Churchyard, Covent Garden. The Theatre Royal has burned and been rebuilt twice since, but sightings of the man in grey continue. Actors still report unexplained assistance during performances and maintain a tradition of leaving a single seat empty in the upper gallery for Thomas. End of file. Case file NOA 1582K. Classification Herbalist Notes. Date of statement 24th June 1582. Location New Forest, Hampshire. Notes of herbalist Margaret Brownlow Quay. Margaret Brownlow. Herbalist. Do record my encounter in the New Forest. My work requires gathering plants that grow wild in the woodland. I know the forest well, having collected there for 20 years. I understand its dangers and respect its boundaries. Last week, I ventured deeper than usual seeking a rare fungus. The fungus grows only in ancient parts of the forest. I followed deer paths into areas I had not previously explored. The trees grew thick, blocking much of the afternoon light. The air felt heavy, still, as if waiting. I found the fungus growing at the base of an enormous oak. The tree was ancient, its trunk twisted and gnarled, its branches spread wide, creating a canopy like a cathedral ceiling. As I knelt to harvest the fungus, I heard music. Pipes and fiddles playing a lively tune. The sound came from somewhere ahead, deeper in the trees. I followed it, curious who might be making merry in this remote place. The music grew louder. I heard laughter and voices raised in celebration. I came upon a clearing I had never seen before. In the center was a ring of mushrooms, perfectly circular. Within the ring, figures danced. They were tall and beautiful, dressed in rich garments of green and gold. They spun and leaped with inhuman grace. Their feet barely touched the ground. The musicians sat at the edge of the circle, playing instruments that seemed to play themselves. The melody was intoxicating, irresistible. I felt my own feet begin to move in time with the music. I took a step toward the circle. Then I remembered the old warnings. Never enter a fairy ring. Never dance with the fair folk. Those who join their revelry are lost forever. I stopped, though every fiber of my being urged me forward. One of the dancers noticed me. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Her hair flowed like liquid gold. Her eyes were green as spring leaves. She smiled and beckoned me to join. I shook my head, backing away. Her smile faded. The other dancers stopped and turned toward me. All wore the same expression now. Beautiful faces twisted with anger. The music changed from joyful to threatening. The notes became discordant, painful to hear. The dancers began moving toward me. Their beautiful forms shifted. Their faces became sharp, inhuman. Their fingers extended into claws. Their teeth grew pointed. They no longer walked but glided across the ground. I ran. Behind me I heard them pursuing. Their laughter echoed through the trees. Not human laughter, but something wild and cruel. I ran without direction, only away. Branches tore at my clothes and face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. The forest itself had turned hostile. I burst through undergrowth into a stream. The moment my feet touched the running water, the pursuit ceased. I looked back. The fair folk stood at the stream's edge. They could not, or would not cross. They stared at me with hatred. Then, like smoke, they faded. The forest returned to normal. Birds sang again. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. I followed the stream until I found familiar landmarks. I did not stop running until I reached home. I examined myself for injuries. Scratches covered my arms and face from the branches, but I also found marks I could not explain. Circular burns on my wrists, as if hands had gripped me. The burns were ice cold to the touch. They have not healed despite my best salves and treatments. I have not returned to that part of the forest. I will not go back. The fair folk do not forgive those who reject their hospitality. They do not forget. I see them sometimes in my dreams, dancing in their circle, waiting for me to return. Margaret Brownlow, herbalist, New Forest, Hampshire, 24th June, 1582. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Fairy ring phenomena are widely reported in the New Forest. Multiple disappearances over the centuries remain unexplained, with missing persons last seen entering deep woodland. The fungal rings are documented scientifically, but accounts of beings associated with them persist. Modern visitors report disorientation, lost time, and unexplained injuries in certain forest areas. Park rangers advise staying on marked paths. End of file. Case file NOA 1767D. Classification: Ship Captain's Log. Date of statement: 17th September 1767. Location: North Sea. Log A. Entry of Captain Henry Blackwood refers. Captain Henry Blackwood, master of the merchant vessel Sea Falcon, do record events during our crossing from Amsterdam to Newcastle. We departed Amsterdam on the 14th with good weather and favourable winds. Our cargo was timber and Dutch goods, bound for English markets. The crew numbered 18 souls, all experienced seamen. The first 2 days passed without incident. On the third day, we observed another ship on the horizon. It was under full sail, moving swiftly despite the moderate wind. As it drew nearer, we saw it was a large vessel of military design, but it flew no flag that we could identify. The sails were dark grey, almost black. The hull was painted in similar dark tones. The ship appeared to be pursuing us deliberately. I ordered our best speed, though we could not match a vessel of that size. Within an hour, it had closed to within a few hundred yards. I could see figures on its deck through my glass. They wore uniforms, but of no navy I recognized. The ship pulled alongside us. I expected them to hail us or demand our papers. Instead, they simply kept pace. The crew on the strange ship stood at attention along the rail, all facing us, all absolutely motionless. Not a single man moved despite the ship's motion through waves. They stood rigid as statues. My men grew uneasy. One sailor crossed himself and whispered about ghost ships. I ordered him to silence such superstitious talk, but I felt the same unease. Something was deeply wrong about that vessel. We sailed parallel for over an hour. The strange ship matched our every turn. When we tacked, they tacked. When we adjusted sails, they adjusted. Yet I saw no one give orders on their deck. The crew remained frozen in position. Then one of my men screamed. He pointed at the other ship's crew. "They have no faces, Captain." I looked again through my glass. He was right. The uniforms were there. The bodies stood in formation, but where faces should be were only smooth expanses of flesh. No eyes, no noses, no mouths. Just blank surfaces turned toward us. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the glass. The faceless crew began to move in unison. They raised their arms and pointed at us. Every single one. Dozens of blank faces aimed our direction. Dozens of pointing fingers. The wind died suddenly. Our sails went slack. The sea became calm as glass. The strange ship's sails remained full despite the lack of wind. It began to circle us slowly. The pointing crew never lowered their arms. We sat dead in the water, helpless. My men prayed, wept, or stood frozen in terror. I tried to maintain order, but fear had taken them. The circling continued for what felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as the wind had died, it returned. A strong gust filled our sails. The Sea Falcon lurched forward. I looked for the strange ship. It was gone, vanished completely. The horizon showed no vessel in any direction. We searched, but found no trace of it. My first mate suggested it had been a mass delusion. Perhaps we had all suffered the same fever dream, but we all saw the same thing. We all witnessed those faceless watchers. I have made inquiries at every port since. No one knows of such a ship. No navy employs vessels of that description. Several old sailors have whispered similar tales. Ships with no flag and no faced crew. They appear before disasters. They are omens of death at sea. I pray they were wrong. I pray we were not marked for doom. But I cannot forget those blank faces watching us, those pointing fingers, those silent warnings from sailors who were not sailors, from a ship that should not exist. Captain Henry Blackwood, aboard Sea Falcon 17th September 1767, archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The Sea Falcon arrived safely in Newcastle on September 19th, 1767. However, the ship was lost with all hands on its next voyage in November 1767. The cause was never determined. Similar reports of faceless sailors appear in maritime records across centuries, always preceding fatal voyages. The phenomenon remains unexplained, though some researchers suggest mass hallucination caused by ergot poisoning or other toxins. End of file. Case file NOA 1643P. Classification Village Constable's Report. Date of statement 1st November 1643. Location Pluckley, Kent. Report of Constable Walter Finch Thewis. Walter Finch, Constable of Pluckley Village. Do report events at the old mill. The mill ceased operation 5 years past when the miller died. His widow could not manage it alone, and the building fell into disrepair. It has stood empty since, slowly deteriorating. Local children claim the mill is haunted. They report seeing lights in the windows after dark. They describe hearing the great wheel turning despite no water flow to drive it. I dismissed such tales as imagination. Last week, circumstances forced me to investigate. A vagrant was reported sheltering in the mill. I went to move him along or offer assistance as needed. I arrived at the mill near dusk. The building loomed against the darkening sky. Windows gaped like empty eyes. The great wheel stood motionless, half rotted. I called out, announcing my authority and peaceful intentions. No response came. I entered through the main door, which hung loose on broken hinges. Inside, the mill was as I expected. Broken machinery, scattered grain long gone to rot, dust and cobwebs thick on every surface. I searched the ground floor thoroughly. No vagrant, no signs of recent habitation. I climbed the stairs to the upper level. The stairs creaked ominously under my weight. Several boards were rotten through. I proceeded carefully. The upper floor held the great grinding stones. They sat silent, covered in years of dust. The gear mechanisms that drove them were rusted solid. Nothing could make them turn. Yet, as I stood there, I heard grinding, stone against stone, the unmistakable sound of the mill operating. I looked at the great stones. They remained motionless, but the sound continued, growing louder. I heard the water wheel beginning to turn outside, the creak of wood, the splash of water. I went to the window. The wheel was moving, turning steadily despite the dry mill race below it. The wheel moved through empty air, powered by nothing. Yet it turned as if driven by a full flow of water. The grinding sound intensified. I looked back at the stones. They were spinning now, the upper stone rotating rapidly over the lower. But the gears did not move. The mechanisms remained frozen with rust. The stones turned independently, impossibly. Then I saw him. The miller, or what had been the miller. He stood at the hopper, pouring grain into the stones. The grain flowed in a steady stream from his hands, but his hands held nothing visible. He poured phantom grain into grinding stones driven by phantom power. He worked with the focused intensity of a man at his trade. I called out to him. He did not hear or did not acknowledge me. He continued his impossible labor. I approached closer. His form was translucent. I could see the wall through his body. His clothes were the same he had worn in life. His face bore the same permanent scowl he had been known for. He looked exactly as he had before death claimed him. I watched him work through his routine, pouring grain, checking the stones, adjusting mechanisms, going through the motions he had performed 10,000 times in life, repeating them endlessly in death. The whole mill operated around him, wheel turning, stones grinding, machinery moving, all of it ghostly, all of it impossible. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The wheel ceased turning. The stones fell still. The miller faded like morning mist. The mill returned to silence and decay. I stood alone in the darkness. I have reported my findings to the village elders. They were not surprised. Several admitted to witnessing similar phenomena. The miller had been devoted to his work above all else. He had no family, no interest beyond the mill. It was his entire life. Perhaps it remained his entire death as well, unable to cease the work that defined him. Condemned to grind phantom grain for eternity. I have posted notice that the mill is unsafe. But in truth, the danger is not structural. The danger is encountering a man who cannot stop working. Even death does not grant him rest. Walter Finch, Constable Pluckley, Kent, 1st November, 1643. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Pluckley is known as England's most haunted village, with over a dozen reported ghosts. The mill was demolished in 1721, but the mill race remains. Visitors to the site report hearing grinding sounds and seeing the ghost of a man pantomiming work. The phenomenon is most active near dusk. The dedication to labor that transcends death appears to be a recurring theme in spectral accounts. End of file. Case file NOA1781R. Classification: Doctor's Case Study. Date of statement: 12th August, 1781. Location: Bath, Somerset. Case study of Dr. Benjamin Walsh. First, Dr. Benjamin Walsh. Do record the peculiar case of Miss Eleanor Sutton. Miss Sutton, age 19, was brought to my attention by her distraught mother. The young woman had fallen into a strange state of stupor. She would sit for hours without moving, staring into space. When she spoke, it was not in her own voice. Multiple voices emerged from her mouth. Old voices, young voices, foreign accents, none resembling her natural speech. I examined her thoroughly for physical causes. I found her body in good health. Her eyes responded normally to light. Her reflexes functioned properly, but her mind seemed absent, as if she had vacated her own body. I attempted various treatments to rouse her from the state. Nothing produced lasting improvement. I decided to observe her carefully during an episode. I sat with her in her room as evening fell. She had been sitting silent for hours when suddenly she spoke. "The water is so cold." The voice was that of a young child. "I cannot feel my legs. Mother will be so angry I fell in." I asked who was speaking. "My name is Thomas. I live in Bristol. I was trying to catch a fish and I fell in the river." I asked how old Thomas was. "I am 7 years old. It is very dark now. I cannot find the bank." The voice faded. Miss Sutton's body slumped. Minutes later, another voice emerged. This time an elderly woman with a Welsh accent. She spoke of working in a mine in Wales. She described an accident, rocks falling, darkness closing in. Then she too faded. Over the next hour, dozens of voices spoke through Miss Sutton. All described moments of death, a soldier dying on a battlefield, a woman giving birth that went terribly wrong, an old man succumbing to illness in his bed. Each voice detailed their final moments. Each described the transition from life to death. I began to understand what was happening. Miss Sutton was not ill. She had somehow become a conduit. Souls in the moment of death were speaking through her, using her voice to narrate their passing. I asked if she could hear them when she was aware. When she returned to herself briefly, she confirmed it. "They are always there, Doctor. Hundreds of them, thousands, all dying, all calling out. I cannot block them. They overwhelm me." She wept. "I hear every death that occurs. I feel their pain, their fear, their sorrow. I cannot bear it." I had no treatment for such a condition. No medicine could close whatever door had opened in her mind. I suggested isolation, quiet, removal from populated areas. Perhaps in solitude, away from the concentrations of people dying, she would find relief. Her family took her to a remote cottage in the countryside. For a time, the voices diminished, but they never ceased entirely. Death occurs everywhere, in cities and villages and lonely farmhouses. The souls of the dying have no regard for walls or distance. They found her still. Miss Sutton wrote me one final letter before communication ceased. She said she had accepted her fate. She would be a witness to humanity's final moments. She would hear the last words of thousands. She would carry their deaths with her until her own release came. She asked me to record her case for posterity, so that others might understand if they encountered similar afflictions. She begged me to search for remedies, for those who might suffer as she suffered. I have found none. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Some gifts are indistinguishable from curses. Dr. Benjamin Walsh Bath, Somerset, 12th August, 1781. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Eleanor Sutton died in 1783 at age 21. The cause of death was listed as brain fever, but no autopsy was performed. Her family burned her personal writings at her request. Similar cases of death mediums appear occasionally in medical literature. No effective treatment has ever been documented. The sheer psychological burden of perceiving others' deaths appears universally fatal to those afflicted. End of file. Case file NOA 1696T. Classification: Keeper's Log. Date of statement: 23rd December 1696. Location: Tower of London. Log entry of Keeper Samuel Croft. Samuel Croft, Keeper at the Tower of London. Do record events in the White Tower. I have served here for 12 years, guarding prisoners and maintaining order. The tower holds many souls, both living and dead. Its walls have witnessed centuries of suffering. But what I experienced last night exceeds all previous encounters. I was making rounds through the White Tower after midnight. Most prisoners were asleep in their cells. The corridors were quiet, lit only by my lantern. As I climbed the stairs to the upper level, I heard voices, multiple people speaking in hushed tones. I assumed prisoners were communicating between cells. but the voices came from the chapel of St. John the Evangelist. No prisoners were housed near the chapel. I approached cautiously. The heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. Candlelight flickered within. I peered through the opening. The chapel was filled with people, dozens of them, arranged in rows as if attending Mass. All wore clothing from various historical periods: medieval garments, Tudor dress, Stuart fashion. All sat perfectly still, facing the altar. I recognized some faces from portraits, historical figures who had been imprisoned here, people long dead. A woman in Tudor dress turned to look at me. I recognized her features from paintings. Anne Boleyn, executed in 1536. Yet she sat in the chapel, solid and real. She smiled sadly and gestured for me to enter. I pushed the door fully open. Every head turned toward me, dozens of the dead watching me. Their expressions were not threatening. They appeared sorrowful, resigned. They were attending a Mass for themselves, a service for all who died at the tower. At the altar stood a priest in ancient vestments. He spoke in Latin, conducting the ritual. His voice echoed strangely, as if from a great distance. I watched, transfixed, as the service continued. The congregation responded to the prayers. Their voices blended in eerie harmony. They rose, knelt, and sat in perfect unison, going through the motions of faith they had held in life. The priest raised the host. Every spirit bowed their head. The candlelight grew brighter, almost blinding. Then, one by one, the figures began to fade, starting with those in the back rows and moving forward. Each spirit disappeared like smoke dissipating. They did not vanish with fear or reluctance. They seemed to welcome the dissolution, as if the Mass had granted them something they needed. Temporary peace, perhaps, or the illusion of absolution for sins real and imagined. Anne Boleyn was among the last to fade. She looked at me once more before departing. "We gather every Christmas Eve," she said. Her voice was clear despite her fading form. "We remember what we were. We mourn what we lost. We pray for release that never comes." Then she was gone. The chapel stood empty. The candles I had seen were not there. The altar was bare, dusty from disuse. I was alone in darkness with only my lantern. I have reported this to my superiors. They smiled knowingly. Apparently, many keepers have witnessed the Christmas Eve Mass. It is an old tradition among the tower's ghostly residents, a gathering of all who died within these walls, a single night when they can come together, to share their eternal burden, to find comfort in mutual suffering, to pray as one for the peace they will likely never find. I will be on duty next Christmas Eve. I intend to observe again, to witness this communion of the condemned, this congregation that death cannot dissolve. Samuel Croft, Keeper, Tower of London, 23rd December, 1696. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. The Tower of London is among England's most haunted locations. Hundreds of executions and deaths occurred there over 9 centuries. Modern guards report similar Christmas Eve phenomena. Security cameras occasionally capture unexplained lights in the chapel of St. John. Audio recordings pick up what sounds like medieval Latin prayers. The tradition of the spectral Mass appears to continue to this day. End of file. Case file NOA 1742W. Classification: Farmer's testimony. Date of statement: 9th April 1742. Location: Exmoor, Devon. Testimony of farmer Joshua Blackmore. Joshua Blackmore. Farmer, do testify regarding the thing that hunts Exmoor. My family has farmed these lands for 4 generations. We know the moor in all seasons, in all weathers. We respect its dangers and observe its rules. But something has changed these past months. Something new stalks the moorland. Or perhaps something old has awakened. It began with livestock deaths. Sheep found torn apart in the fields. The wounds were not from any wolf or dog. The flesh was not eaten but shredded, as if whatever killed them did so for pleasure rather than hunger. I lost 12 sheep in a fortnight. My neighbors reported similar losses. We organized a hunt, thinking a large predator had moved into the area. 20 men with dogs and guns searched the moor for 3 days. We found no trace of any animal, no tracks, no scat, no den. The killings continued. I set watch over my remaining flock at night. I built a shelter overlooking the field where they grazed. I armed myself with a musket and maintained vigil. For 2 nights, nothing occurred. On the 3rd night, near midnight, the sheep grew agitated. They clustered together, bleating in fear. I looked for the source of their distress. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed movement at the edge of the field. Something large, low to the ground. It moved with a strange loping gait, not like any animal I knew. I raised my musket and called out. The thing stopped. 2 eyes reflected my lantern light. But the eyes were wrong. Too large, too widely spaced, and they glowed with their own light. A sickly yellow-green. The creature stood. It rose onto hind legs like a man. But it was not a man. Too tall, too thin. The proportions were distorted, elongated. The head was narrow, almost skull-like. The mouth opened impossibly wide. Rows of teeth caught the light. It looked directly at me. I felt paralyzed by that gaze. Primal terror locked my muscles. I could not raise the musket. I could not call for help. I could only watch as it approached the sheep. It moved among them on all 4s now. The sheep scattered, but it was too fast. It caught one and brought it down. What happened next haunts me still. The creature did not kill cleanly. It played with the sheep, tossed it, caught it, let it struggle. The sheep's screams filled the night. The thing seemed to enjoy the terror. Finally, it ended the sheep's suffering. Then it looked at me again, those terrible eyes fixed upon me. It took a step toward my shelter. I found my voice and fired the musket. The shot struck it in the chest. It staggered but did not fall. It looked down at the wound, then back at me. It made a sound, not a growl or roar, something like laughter, human laughter emerging from that inhuman throat. Then it ran, not fleeing, but moving with purpose. It vanished into the darkness of the moor. I found the sheep torn apart, the musket ball embedded in rock beyond where the creature had stood. The shot had passed clean through it, as if it were insubstantial, or had healed instantly. I will not watch alone again. I have moved my family into the village. We will not stay on the farm while that thing roams. Other farmers have done the same. We leave the moor to whatever claims it. Some force from another time, or from no time any Christian man should know. Joshua Blackmore, Farmer Exmoor, Devon 9th, April 1742. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Exmoor has a long history of mysterious predator sightings. The Beast of Exmoor legend persists to modern times. Livestock deaths with unusual wound patterns continue to be reported. Multiple expeditions have sought the creature without success. Whether supernatural entity, unknown animal, or mass hysteria remains debated. Moorland residents continue to report encounters with something that defies classification. End of file. Case closed to public record. The original document remains sealed within the vaults of the British Museum. The NOA archive remains committed to documenting phenomena that defy conventional understanding. These cases are submitted for academic review and further investigation. Further access requires written authorization or curiosity strong enough to ignore the warnings. Until next time, these are the National Occult Archives.